Chapter 461, Enhancement Plan. Saul didn't dig too deeply into what little algae meant by the big tree. Given little algae's current ability to express itself, big tree could refer to roots, something tree-shaped, or something else entirely. The emotions it conveyed to Saul were nervousness and confusion, but not much fear. Saul comforted little algae and had Marsh drive them away from the area. The process of moving into the new residence went very smoothly, and no one noticed anything unusual. Saul's temporary lodging was on the top floor of a 33-story building. The entire floor was his, and he could use the rooftop area free of charge. The floors below were occupied by regular people. According to the agent John, there was a radiation isolation plate between the top floor and the floors below. Saul would use a private elevator pod separate from the ones used by ordinary residents, so there would be no interaction. Ordinary people would never disturb Saul. After moving in, Saul spent some time on the rooftop observing the surroundings. He noticed that the rooftops of the surrounding buildings were all set up in similar fashion. Raising the wizard's residence to the top floor did make sense to avoid disturbances. But with a wizard, especially a true wizard, living overhead, would that really have no effect on the people below? He thought of the magical tools scattered everywhere, the apprentices whose heads could turn into surveillance discs, and the giant tree growing under the ground. Saul shook his head and instead used a vigilant spell formation to secure the entire residence. He also had little algae plant its clones both inside the building and on the rooftop. After spending a full day organizing the new temporary home, Saul began to plan his outings. His reason for temporarily staying in Kaugus City was to take advantage of this prosperous metropolis to gather certain materials and tools, and also to improve his own knowledge and re-solidify his foundation. Back at the Wizard Tower, his advancement had been rapid. Though enviable, it was inevitable that he had missed or rushed through some things. First, the meditation technique. The erosion diagram still suits me well, but it's no longer sufficient for my current usage environment. Ideally, I need an advanced meditation method similar to the erosion diagram. Saul was speaking to Agu, as well as the three consciousnesses still housed in the diary. As for Lakai, who was about to dissipate, and Gyudo, who had barely been used, Saul had filtered them out for now. Next, I need to collect other third-rank spells. Agu, I'll leave this task to you. Go search around and see if there are any places similar to a Wizard Tower registry. Also, get a sense of the market prices. Agu nodded. Also, I need to continue researching soul fishing and the mental battlefield. These two mental spells are my trump cards and my biggest confidence when entering the borderland. But right now, I have two problems. Soul fishing is no longer able to instantly kill true wizards, and mental battlefield requires me to be physically safe while using it, which places severe restrictions on when it can be cast. Then there's the issue of the four consciousnesses. Though they have deep theoretical knowledge, they're starting to fall behind in real combat. While the corpses they inhabit allow them to cast magic, those corpses have low magic reserves, and the spirit bodies of the consciousnesses are not as stable as they were when alive. At this point, Morden offered a suggestion from inside the diary. Morden, Master, you don't necessarily have to focus so much on finding bodies for us to fight in. I still remember some of my time as a wraith. Even though I couldn't use magic then, the chaotic mix of grudges I carried made it easy to kill even third-rank apprentices. Morden's words gave Saul a sudden revelation. That's right. The reason I've been letting the consciousnesses live inside vessels is mostly due to influence from the resurrection experiments, but vessels place many restrictions on them. They're helpful for daily living, yes, but when it comes to battle, they're always being held back. Saul recalled the research idea he'd come across earlier, arming soul bodies. If he could ensure that the consciousnesses remained uncorrupted while granting them the combat power of wraiths, wouldn't that make him a master of souls? And compared to carrying around bulky vessels, soul bodies were much easier to conceal and transport. All right, Agu, let's keep an eye out for any spells or knowledge related to armed soul bodies. Got it, Agu nodded without hesitation. Herman chimed in from the diary to reaffirm his loyalty. Herman, Master, no matter what experiment you wish to do, I will fully cooperate with you. Morden, no, this time let me do it. I've been a wraith before, so I'm more familiar with the warning signs of losing control. Saul tapped the table with his fingers a few times, but didn't make a decision right away. When it came time to actually experiment on one of the consciousnesses, he'd choose whoever was most suitable. Aside from upgrading the consciousnesses, Saul also needed to work on improving himself. That was the foundation of all else. He looked at his hand resting on the table. Ever since he had neutralized the soul toxin last time, his skin had gone from gray to a normal flesh tone, though still somewhat pale. I need to increase my defense. If I can place my body into a state of absolute defense for a certain period, then even in the presence of others, I could use mental battlefield without worrying about getting ambushed. Having laid out both short-term and long-term development plans, Saul stood up and said, "All right, let's head out. Nothing will come from sitting around indoors." Before leaving, Saul used his mental realm to summon the most clever of the consciousnesses, Anne. Most of the materials from the carriage had already been moved into the new residence. He needed someone to stay behind and watch over everything. However, just as Saul reached the entrance, ready to begin his outing, something interrupted him. Next to the dedicated elevator pod for his new home was a tightly sealed stairwell. If someone else wanted to reach him, they would have to take a different elevator to the 32nd floor and climb the stairs. As Saul approached the elevator and pressed the button to open the door, footsteps suddenly echoed from the stairwell. Agu immediately moved toward the door and stood behind it. "Who's there?" The footsteps paused, then quickened. "My lord, I'm a courier. I have a letter for you." Saul and Agu exchanged a glance. They had just moved in. As far as they knew, only that agent John knew where they lived. Had John sent him a letter? But what could a regular person have to say that required contacting a wizard? Agu scanned the person mentally and confirmed it was just a normal human. With Saul's permission, he opened the stairwell door. Outside stood a teenage courier, cautious but curious. He gave Agu a brief, nervous glance, then quickly looked away and handed over a thin envelope sealed with wax. Agu took it. "Who sent this letter?" "Sorry, my lord," the courier said with his head bowed. "This letter was dispatched automatically from the post office system. I don't have any information on the sender." Agu inspected the letter. There didn't seem to be any traps or magical devices. On the wax seal was a single small line of text. "To my little brother personally." Could this be a mistake? Agu frowned. He was a dead man, and to his knowledge his master was an orphan. He had no brother. "It's unlikely. The letter was sent based on your residence permit information. Maybe you should open it. If it's not yours, I can return it to the post office." Agu was about to open the letter when Saul suddenly reached out and snatched it from his fingers. His expression had grown serious as he turned and walked back inside, letter in hand. "I know who it's from. You may go now." Given permission, the courier immediately bowed and left. He clearly knew the resident here was a wizard. Aside from his brief curiosity at the beginning, he'd been cautious and respectful the entire time. Once the door was closed again, Agu caught up to Saul in the living room. "Master, you know who sent the letter." Who else could it be? Saul had already opened the envelope and was shaking out the letter. Kismet. Chapter 462, Kismet's Gift. "Dear little master brother." Hope this letter finds you well. Your big brother figured you. Head to Kaugus City after leaving the Wizard Tower, so I left this letter here especially to ease your worries and help you along. In the event that Gorsa lost the battle at the Wizard Tower, I imagine you would have found a way to escape. To avoid being hunted, you'd surely take the risk of entering the borderland. Before that, though, you'd need to gather some essential supplies here. If that were the case, you'd be receiving a different letter, along with a little gift I've prepared for you. But since you're reading this letter, then let me first congratulate you on gaining a third-rank mentor. Though that guy's really stingy. In the end, he tattled on me, which forced me to temporarily leave Stat. That said, for a member of the Glare family, becoming a third-rank wizard focused on the light element also means leaving the Western region. Without a high-rank wizard around, the Wizard Tower's ceiling is just too low for you. You'll likely head to the neutral Baton Academy, or perhaps even venture into the borderland. Wherever your final destination may be, Kaugust is a fine place to pass through. Kaugust is a wonderful city right now, especially for true wizards. It's midsummer, lush greenery, blossoms everywhere. I imagine you're enjoying a pleasant study session on some rooftop or in a cozy little courtyard. But really, such a laid-back life doesn't suit someone like you, does it? So, as the victor of the Wizard Tower battle entering Kaugust, I simply had to prepare a grand gift for you. Hope you like it, and hope it adds a bit of new joy to your life, Tilda. Your loyal, understanding, and tattled on by Gorsa big brother. Kismet. After reading the letter, Saul had a strong urge to tear it up on the spot. This guy really is true to his word. Now that he sees I'm safe, he's determined to stir up trouble for me. What grand gift, more like grand trouble, Saul grumbled in his heart. Master, Agu, as a consciousness bound to the diary, more or less understood Saul's unusual relationship with Kismet. That man, sometimes a help, sometimes a foe, his true intentions remained unknown. It's nothing, we'll stick to the original plan. If things get too messy, we just leave Kaugust. Can't even refuse a gift you don't want. Just as Saul finished speaking, the letter in his hand began to disintegrate into fine dust. This phenomenon had happened once before. Saul didn't stop it. But this time, the moment the letter fully burned away, a streak of black shadow suddenly shot out from it and dove straight into Saul's mind. Seeing this, Agu and Anne were both shocked and rushed over to check Saul's body. To their surprise, Saul only froze for a few seconds before coming to and waving a hand at them. It's fine. Turns out that Black Shadow had entered Saul's mental realm and gone straight into the diary floating within. The diary flipped open, turning directly to Lockye's page. That page had only a sliver of energy left, and the last words written on it were already faint and nearly illegible. Yet the Black Shadow barged in like an unruly guest, utterly ignoring the delicate scrawls, and began to write directly on the darkened page. The master of Kaugust planted a tree. My tender little master, don't you want to make that tree your own? A tree. Saul immediately thought of the giant tree little Algie had discovered underground. Could it really be a tree? If it had drawn Kismet's attention, it definitely wasn't ordinary. However, you entered the diary at will. This can't be your complete soul, can it? Of course not. This is merely a consciousness I control, one that believes it is me. I've named this spell I killed myself. If Master likes it, I can teach it to you someday. Originally, if I'd captured the nightmare butterfly, I could have refined this spell even more. But since you wanted to keep it, I'll leave the butterfly to you. You controlled someone else's consciousness just to leave me a message. Has Kismet grown that powerful? Saul felt mostly wary when it came to Kismet. If he could, he'd rather have the guy under the diary's absolute control like Penny. Unfortunately, that was just wishful thinking for now. Who I am and who is me, what does it matter? "Master, that little tree beneath Kaugust is growing quite well. If you want to steal it, you'd better hurry. Its owner isn't to be trifled with, but I believe the master of the diary wouldn't care about that, right?" Saul's mouth twitched. He couldn't help cursing. "The hell I wouldn't care. Kaugust City is under Baton Academy, and they've got second-rank wizards. I'd have to be insane to go poking a hornet's nest like that." Saul came to Kaugust just to find a stable place to lay low and gather supplies, not to stir up trouble. All right, all right. Why is Master so afraid of dying? Only by getting closer to death can you get closer to the diary. Saul pursed his lips. He had to admit, with the diary, he could avoid many dangers. But in his view, a wizard should take risks in pursuit of knowledge, not for thrills. At the moment, Saul had no desire for the tree hidden beneath Kaugust. That would only disrupt his current plans for advancement. What a shame, my grand gift. And Master doesn't want it. But if you can't steal the tree, you could always pluck a few fruits. What do you mean by fruits? Wraiths, a whole lot of wraiths. Saul folded his arms and leaned back. Now that did scratch an itch. Whether it was for enhancing his soul fishing or strengthening his mental battlefield, or for modifying the consciousnesses within the diary, he needed soul fragments. And wraiths happened to be one of the best sources for high-quality soul fragments. Saul had originally planned to venture into the death-soaked borderland to gather enough wraiths or resentful spirits. He hadn't expected this seemingly prosperous Kaugust to be crawling with them. And since Kismet had gone out of his way to point it out, it certainly wasn't just a few stray ghosts. Well, that's not bad, but where am I supposed to find the wraiths? Are you sure you want to ask me? I do know where they're most concentrated, Tilda. Saul immediately shut his mouth. Right, never ask him. Even if he tells the truth, he'll definitely point Saul toward the most dangerous and haunted spot of all. Probably something to do with that tree. If you're not going to ask, then let's end this exchange here. I don't know anything else anyway. The last line appeared clearly on the blackened page. Even though the hypnotized consciousness Kismet used still had plenty of energy, the page it resided on shattered without mercy. Saul faintly heard Lockey's terrified scream. Unfortunate and helpless. Like an insect on the road, crushed under a passing carriage without ever being noticed. The diary closed, and Saul gained another name for his list of black pages. Saul sat back in the sofa, deep in thought. After a while, he smiled and shook his head. Kismet probably meant to give me a choice between the tree and the wraiths, so I'd compare the two and pick the safer path of harvesting wraiths. And even if I saw through it, I'd still choose to hunt wraiths in the end. After all, they'll be easier to deal with here than in the borderland. Everything he does seems to be pushing me to grow faster. With that thought, Saul stood up and headed out. Master, Agua and Anne stood as well, confused. Saul paused in his steps and gave a quick command. You two keep following the original plan. As for me, I'm leaving the city and coming back in disguise. I'm off to claim the other gift Kismet left behind. Chapter 463, Borrowing Strength. From Kismet's letter, it was clear that he had prepared two gifts for Saul. One was a small favor for when he was down, and the other, a big trouble for when he was on top. Saul didn't know whether the other letter was destroyed when he received the first one. But now, with plenty of time, he decided to give it a try. It wasn't so much that he cared about the small things Kismet had prepared. Well, maybe a little curious, but mainly he wanted to see how Kismet would send him letters if he went into hiding, and to find out what other arrangements he had in Kaugust City. So Saul spent half a day leaving Kaugust, then disguised himself and entered again. He finally discovered Kismet's special mark in a place where people were lining up to register their identities. Following the mark, he found the small gift left by Kismet inside a tall building near the city wall. The items were a bottle of healing potion, a bottle of mental stability potion, and a new identity for an ordinary person. Just as Saul was taking the items, another person walked in with a key. Saul immediately hid. The person's expression was stiff and unnatural, likely another individual hypnotized by Kismet. When this person entered and saw that the items were missing, he suddenly looked around the room, then smiled with a strange curve. Playful. After that, he returned to his emotionless expression, threw the key on the ground, and walked out. Has this person also been hypnotized by Kismet to act like him? Saul walked out from his hiding place and picked up the key on the floor. This series of actions didn't set off any alarms in his diary, so it was safe to assume this was Kismet's trap. Saul collected the potions, recorded the identity information Kismet had prepared, and left the backup green pass inside the room. The green pass was a regular pass for ordinary residents of the city. Then he left Kaugus City again, retrieved his original silver pass, and took Marsh's carriage back into the city. The reason Saul didn't hide the passes on his person and didn't store both passes together was because he worried that Kaugus might have set up special mechanisms on the passes that could expose his movements. After re-entering Kaugus City, Saul followed his original plan, asking Marsh to drive towards Baton Academy. He wanted to first see the new magical tools created by Baton Academy, and also look for ways to make money and earn magic crystals. Baton Academy was located on the cliffs on the southeast side of Kaugus, with crashing waves below. From the guidebook, it was clear that the academy occupied a third of the entire city. Between the academy and the city was a small area of villas and estates. If Saul had chosen a villa from the agency center back then, he would likely have lived in this area. At the west gate of Baton Academy, some people were waiting to enter. Among them, some wore long robes similar to Saul. Their expressions varied. Some were anxious, others excited, and a few wore sinister looks. As Saul's carriage approached, many people looked over, scrutinizing the newcomer. At this point, a wizard apprentice dressed in a blue and white uniform with silver-edged trims walked out. Saul immediately recognized him as Captain Harry, whom he had met not long ago. Captain Harry appeared troubled and gloomy, as if he was facing some difficulty. When Saul, holding his silver pass, was warmly invited inside by a Baton Academy apprentice at the entrance, Harry, noticing the movement, looked up in a daze, immediately recognizing Saul from their previous meetings. His eyes spun around and then, with a quick sprint, he ran to Saul's carriage window before it could move. "My lord, I never expected to meet you here." Harry took off his soft cap, holding it tightly in his hands. Saul leaned out and smiled when he saw a familiar face. "Captain Harry, nice to see you again." He noticed the wizard apprentice who walked behind Harry but didn't greet him. If Harry were familiar with the person, he would have introduced them. "How's the airship? Was it not repaired yet?" Saul casually asked, noticing Harry hadn't made an introduction. "Ah, thank you for your concern, it's already fixed. I came over to handle some matters. Since I saw you, I thought I'd stop by to greet you." Harry then took a couple of steps back, showing courtesy. "I know you're busy, so I won't disturb you further." He bowed deeply and made a gesture to send Saul on his way. Saul nodded with a smile and returned to his carriage. As the carriage moved along, Marsh's muttering voice came from the front. "My lord, I think that airship captain is using you." While admiring the sights of Baton Academy, Saul smiled. Sometimes, being used by others isn't a bad thing. Meanwhile, after Saul's carriage had driven away, Harry straightened up, sighed softly, and then apologized to the silent wizard apprentice behind him with an awkward smile. "Sorry, sir. I met an acquaintance and stopped to greet him. I'll head back now to prepare for the handover." The apprentice thought for a moment before speaking. "Wait a minute." He walked to the registration desk at the west gate, asked a few questions, then returned. Your renewal documents aren't fully qualified, but they're very close. Go back and prepare another one and come back tomorrow for the review. Harry's face lit up with joy. He bowed repeatedly. Thank you so much. I'll be sure to prepare it carefully next time. Without waiting for any further prompts, Harry turned and quickly left the academy. The other commoners waiting at the gate watched Harry's light-hearted departure, many with envious and jealous expressions. On the other side, Saul followed the directions to Bayton Academy's exhibition hall. Although it was called an exhibition hall, it was more like a marketplace for selling things. There were more people inside, mostly wizards. A couple of them appeared to be true wizards. Others made sure to respectfully keep their distance, at least 3 meters away from the two true wizards. Many wizards were accompanied by a beautiful saleswoman who provided detailed explanations of the products. Saul showed his pass as he entered, and immediately 2 people approached him. One was a handsome man, and the other a woman. "Good morning, sir. Which of us can assist you today?" The woman smiled as she spoke first. The man wore a smile as well, gazing at Saul. Saul felt something was off, but couldn't pinpoint what it was. He casually said to the woman, "Then please, I'll let you introduce things to me." The woman's eyes gleamed with delight at the response, while the man appeared slightly disappointed but didn't press the matter. He bowed respectfully and stepped back. The woman was dressed in a blue and white uniform as well, but it lacked the silver trim. Her outfit was not a long robe, but a form-fitting dress instead. The skirt was very short and revealing. "Are all of you from Bayton Academy?" Saul didn't rush to examine the items in the exhibition hall, but instead took a careful look at the woman from head to toe. He wasn't wrong. Both the woman and the man behind her were ordinary people. Bayton Academy actually let a group of ordinary people stay in this hall full of magical items and serve wizards. Did these ordinary people even realize they might not survive long because of this? Chapter 464, Storage Device. Bayton Academy is probably treating ordinary people as consumables. Now, in Kogus City, there might be a shortage of many things, but there's never a shortage of people. Do these 2 individuals know the dangers their work could bring? This is not merely suboptimal for health. The female attendant, Vale, had no idea that Saul was worried about her physical condition. She was quietly guiding him into the exhibition hall, introducing a few of the Academy's specialty products. This is the Academy's best-selling experimental equipment set. Every device comes with a very precise scale. The control panel can input formulas, and the equipment set will automatically complete basic potion preparation, saving manpower and resources, Vale said with a smile. Saul watched as the equipment automatically began mixing a basic healing potion under Vale's control. He clicked his tongue inwardly, then asked, "This requires magic crystals, right? How long can a standard magic crystal last?" Vale, clearly well prepared, answered immediately without hesitation. With continuous use of the full set of equipment, a standard magic crystal lasts for 30 minutes. 30 minutes? Saul looked shocked and struggled to swallow the words. Then why don't I just mix it myself? Vale wasn't surprised by Saul's astonishment. She smiled and said, "Of course, that's the most extreme usage scenario. Normally, with a divided setup, it can last a wizard for about 2 days." It still didn't seem like much of a deal. Poor Saul, shook his head. His little algae could handle some basic experimental work, feed itself, and even take care of its owner. The 2 continued walking. After a brief tour of the outer hall, Saul realized that most of the things displayed here were for wizard apprentices and wizards to use for experiments, and most of it was less than impressive. He wasn't sure how many of these would actually sell. At any rate, after a quick tour, Saul decided there was nothing worth buying. Don't you have the storage bags I saw on the airship? I heard they now have bigger ones. Are you referring to life-related magical tools? Vale naturally called it by its name, as if she were a wizard herself. Saul nodded, and Vale immediately led him down a corridor to another part of the exhibition hall. Upon entering the new hall, Saul immediately felt as if he had entered a technology exhibition. It was the first time he had seen magic applied so extensively to daily life. Here, he also saw many of the facilities he'd encountered in Kaugus City. For example, engines for lift cabins and flight cabins, radiation-proof partitions built into walls, short-range, medium-range, long-range, and ultra-long-range communicators, and more. The common feature of these magical tools was that ordinary people could use them too, as long as they understood the method. There was no need for magical or mental energy to initially activate the tools. Saul couldn't help but think about creating magic-based firearms, or even high-powered explosives. If that were possible, could ordinary people also pose a threat to true wizards? A gun is fast beyond 10 steps, but within 10 steps. Well, magic and martial arts were still different. Just like Saul, with a single thought, he could activate a first-rank spell, Soul Armor for defense. With his current substantial magic and powerful mental strength, even using a first-rank defensive spell, he could block a second-rank offensive spell from a fellow first-rank wizard. The rank of a spell not only represented its power, but also its difficulty and complexity. Many true wizards still preferred using lower-tier spells in battle. They activated quickly, and as long as they gathered enough magic power, they could enhance the spell's strength by 1 or 2 ranks. While Saul was lost in thought, Vale finally brought him to the product he was interested in. This is the new version of the storage bag you were asking about. It's now called a composite space storage device, but if you'd rather continue calling it the storage bag, that's fine too. Vale picked up the composite space storage device and demonstrated it to Saul. The new version of the storage bag had a smaller volume, now the size of a matchbox. It was highly discreet and easy to carry. Its internal space had also increased from the original 3 cubic meters to 10 cubic meters. Plus, it could be customized to partition the space to prevent items from piling up in one place, making it easier to access and find what you need. But the storage device hasn't been fully developed yet, Vale reminded him as she noticed Saul's growing interest. Oh, is there a defect? Saul immediately frowned and asked. He was joking, but now he was ready to open his wallet. Because the internal space is too large, it requires more energy to maintain the stability of the space. Therefore, opening and closing the storage device consumes more energy. The Academy's current starter units cannot provide such a large amount of energy. This means that ordinary people can't use the storage device, and even for you, it will consume more energy. To maintain stability when not in use, extra magic crystals are also needed. So it works, but it's magic draining and expensive. Saul crossed his arms and thought for a moment. If he were to venture into the borderland, he might have to be ready to run at any moment. Carrying a whole cart of luggage wouldn't do. When leaving the Wizard Tower, Saul's storage bag had already been packed to the brim, with only a small portion of space left for emergencies. The rest of the items were in the cart, which was also packed full. Or I could buy 3 or 4 storage bags, and that would be enough space. A storage bag was the size of a backpack. Saul thought it would be manageable to carry 3 or 4. If I were you, I'd definitely choose the storage device. Suddenly, an elderly man with white hair and a braided beard down to his chest walked over. Dean, Vale, who had been speaking comfortably to Saul, immediately bowed her head in fear and greeted the old man. You can leave. I'll explain things to this guest. The old man waved his hand, signaling Vale to step aside. Vale gave a deep bow and then walked towards the entrance. Saul glanced at the old man, then looked at Vale's departing figure. Honestly, he preferred looking at the latter. However, just as Saul looked away, his gaze briefly froze. In his peripheral vision, the previously beautiful and graceful female attendant, Vale, had transformed into a terrifying figure. Her skin was blackened and brown like a charred corpse, and her once graceful walk now moved in stiff, mechanical jerks. But when Saul turned his head again and focused, Vale had returned to her original form, as if the charred corpse had just been a fleeting illusion caused by overlapping shadows. Saul slightly squinted his eyes and noticed a thin, almost transparent line stretching upward from Vale's head. "If you like her, Lord Saul, I can arrange for the Academy to transfer her contract to you." Saul wasn't surprised that the old man knew his name. Even the second-level apprentice at the city gate had recognized him. Clearly, his appearance was no secret among the wizards of Baton Academy. "Does Baton Academy still trade in people?" Saul raised his eyebrows, hiding his puzzlement, and joked. "It's just a work contract," the old man said with a grin. "Of course, I'm sure she'd be happy to transfer the contract to you and provide all kinds of services." The old man emphasized the words "all kinds," giving Saul a knowing look. Chapter 465, Recruitment. Saul and the old man exchanged a light-hearted joke, easing the sense of unfamiliarity between them from their first meeting. "May I ask who you are?" Saul had a vague guess in his heart. "I am Pond, the dean of Baton Academy," the white-haired old man said with a smile. "The dean of Baton Academy. That means he's a second-rank wizard." Saul quickly performed the customary greeting between wizards. Of course, with his third-rank wizard mentor, he didn't need to perform a deep bow. "Dean Pond, greetings." "Hee, no need to be so formal. Well, I see you've already become a true wizard. No wonder you're the apprentice of Wizard Gorsa. I'm sure you'll advance to third rank one day," Dean Pond said, clearly because Saul's mentor treated him with special regard. "Thank you for the compliment, but I still have much to learn. By the way, why did you say the storage device is much better than the storage bag earlier?" This storage device, although not yet common for the general public, has a large space, allows for classification and organization, and most importantly, it can store living creatures that have been treated. If it can store living creatures, that's incredibly convenient. Does it require other equipment to assist? Saul asked, as most of the items he carried were living substances. Many wizard experiments required processing materials while they were still alive. And active materials often had extremely demanding preservation conditions, so very few could be kept on hand. Often, one had to buy or catch them when needed. Saul hadn't felt this deeply when he was at the Wizard Tower, but now that he was fully away, he realized how hard life could be for wandering wizards. Luckily, his primary focus was on the dark element, so he had fewer requirements for living materials. Pond, hearing Saul's guess, nodded with a smile. "Exactly. If you need, you can purchase the corresponding hibernation chambers. We have various models. Besides that, we also offer other storage devices, like the spirit-capturing pods." Dean Pond effortlessly promoted the products, showing that he was quite experienced. However, he likely didn't expect that Gorsa hadn't left Saul with much magic crystals. In fact, because Saul had taken the core of the Wizard Tower, he didn't feel right taking too many valuables from the ruins. After a brief consideration, Saul bought the storage device and 2 hibernation chambers. His magic crystals were suddenly reduced by more than half. When Saul paid, his expression remained unchanged, though a slight pain tugged at his heart. Because Dean Pond accompanied him throughout, the purchase procedure was completed very quickly. A few staff members were mostly ordinary people, quaking slightly in the presence of the dean, indicating his high standing. Once the payment was made and the items were in hand, Saul glanced at the showroom behind him, not daring to linger. Dean Pond also took the opportunity to walk out with him. The architecture of Baton Academy was distinct from the tall buildings of August City. It included sprawling flat buildings, tall towers similar to Wizard Towers, and even a lake with an underwater crystal house that swayed gently. Our academy was established not long ago, but our philosophy is to recruit talented individuals. See, the buildings around here are where our mentors conduct experiments and classes. Dean Pond introduced Saul while walking. This only further confirmed Saul's earlier guess. When they arrived at a building that looked like a haunted house, 3 or 4 wizards happened to emerge from it. The leader, wearing a black cloak, had shoulder epaulets pinned to his cloak, black with a wave-like blue and white symbol in the center. Behind him, the others wore standard Baton Academy uniforms, with 2 silver borders on their clothes. This is Mentor Jonah, who, like you, specializes in the dark element. The others following him are his apprentices. Based on the uniforms, they should all be second-rank apprentices, Pond explained to Saul from a distance of about 10 meters. The group had already noticed Saul and Dean Pond, but didn't approach to greet them. Jonah, turning his head toward them, suddenly squeezed his eyes up to his nose. At that moment, Saul felt a mental force pressing over him. He glanced at Pond, who smiled benignly without any other reaction. With a slight movement of his own mental force, countless semi-transparent tendrils appeared like fine hairs on his skin. The overwhelming mental force was instantly consumed by the tiny sucking mouths on the tendrils. The apprentices following Jonah immediately showed expressions of fear. Jonah's eyes, squeezed together, quickly separated again, continuing to stare at Saul. One of his eyes even flipped entirely, showing only the white. Then Jonah opened his mouth to speak, a true wizard pretending to be a third-rank apprentice. Are you planning to ambush and harm someone? Before Saul could say anything, Dean Pond immediately rebuked, "Stop talking nonsense. I'll deduct your salary." Jonah's mouth immediately closed, twitching and contorting, clearly hurt by the threat of a salary deduction. After a few seconds, his mouth struggled open again, but nothing particularly pleasant came out. "Did you just hire another dark element true wizard? Are you planning to fire me?" "If Master Saul is willing to join, of course, I would be thrilled. At that point, I'll send you to the corpse refining tower." "Master Saul," Jonah turned back, his eyes flipping again. "Is it really that Saul?" Saul stared at him unflinchingly, and suddenly he heard Penny laughing uproariously in his mind. "Why are you laughing?" Saul asked in his thoughts. "Saul, big brother, that guy has a lot of voices inside him. Some are saying they should please you right away, others want to challenge you to a duel to test your strength, and one is saying he was rude to you earlier and wants to kneel before you." "Ha ha ha, they're all about to fight," Penny said, still laughing. "Many voices." Saul scanned Jonah's body briefly. Could this guy have many souls living inside him? He felt a strong curiosity to study this. Jonah, under Saul's gaze, nervously adjusted his cloak. "Of course would I treat others the same way." Pond, although elderly, was quick to compliment, completely unconcerned about his own dignity. Jonah's mouth twitched again, his face contorting as though his facial nerves were spasming. "Go to the corpse refining tower, then. I'm not the one going to cancel the contract." Jonah waved his arms and spoke viciously. Then, as if afraid Pond would deduct his salary again, he turned and ran. The apprentices behind him hurriedly bowed to both Pond and Saul before quickly chasing after him. "I apologize for the trouble," Pond sighed lightly, then turned to Saul and said, "Our academy does recruit all kinds of talents, but sometimes we end up with some strange individuals." Saul smiled. This Baton Academy, which had emerged from the borderland, seemed to be a bit different from what he had imagined. "You're too humble. It's normal for wizards to be free-spirited and honest. Hee, I'm glad you're not upset. Jonah's personality is like that. His mouth is harsh, but he's serious when it comes to work. Pond glanced back at the haunted-looking building, then picked up the previous topic. By the way, I wasn't joking earlier. If you're willing to join Baton Academy, I'll send Jonah to the corpse refining tower. This laboratory will be yours, how about it? Chapter 466, The Cleanser. Already saying it so soon. Saul thought the other party would at least wait until they had toured the academy. When Pond had first appeared and was generously praising him, Saul had already suspected that the other party might be trying to recruit him. Since Pond had even revealed his personal characteristics to the academy's gate guards, they must already know about the fall of the Wizard Tower and Gorse's departure. Though Saul was still Gorse's apprentice, he no longer had an organization. At this point, offering to recruit him and providing generous support would allow them to gain a powerful, true wizard and also please Gorse. Brother Saul, this place is so interesting. Why don't we stay here? As a nightmare butterfly, Penny loved places with lots of people. If it could let her roam freely in dreams, that would be even better. If Saul could stay here a bit longer, she would consider this recruitment. However, Saul still had a wizard tower to maintain, and looking at the prosperous Baton Academy in front of him, the fact that they even used salary deductions to threaten a true wizard showed that their funds were likely not very abundant. Or maybe some crucial resources were monopolized by the dean. Saul lowered his head, pretending to think for a moment, then smiled apologetically and said, "Sorry, Dean Pond. My mentor has other plans for me, so I might not be able to stay here for long." Pond was a bit surprised. "What, will Wizard Gorse return?" "Well, my mentor hasn't said so." Pond didn't immediately give up. He took a step back and said, "Then how about an honorary mentor? You don't need to stay here every day to teach students. You can just participate in some research projects." Saul smiled, but this time he didn't respond. Pond sighed, understanding Saul's meaning. "What a pity. After hearing about your situation, I really admire you. I've never believed that the strength of magic, mental power, or elemental perception can define a wizard's talent. I think true talent lies in a wizard's mind and their relentless spirit of research." Pond pointed to the vast grounds of Baton Academy behind him. "Back in the day, many senior and junior colleagues followed my master, but in the end, I was the only one who reached the second rank. My talent was almost at the bottom among them, but I never gave up on my research. It was with this never-give-up spirit that I managed to turn Baton Academy, once a broken-down institution, into what it is today." Pond's master was probably the third-rank wizard from over 100 years ago, the one who had buried hundreds of wizards in the Hanging Valley. It seemed that shortly after Baton took control of Kaugus City, his master passed away. Considering this, Pond had managed to develop Baton Academy and Kaugus City to this extent. Regardless of what methods he had used, he was certainly a remarkable person. At this point, Pond changed the topic again and invited Saul once more, but this time the position offered was different. "It would be such a waste for someone as capable as you not to join Baton Academy. How about this, Saul? You specialize in dark element magic. Would you be interested in wraiths?" Did Kismet's mention of wraith come from here? Saul immediately showed a hint of interest, though he quickly suppressed it and jokingly asked, "With Baton Academy's prosperity and the flourishing Kaugus, there shouldn't be many wraiths around here, right?" But Pond shook his head and sighed. "Wraiths comes from the human heart, and the human heart is the hardest to understand. To facilitate the development of Baton Academy and trade, we've gathered a large population in Kaugus. The more people there are, the more things happen. Even though we've tried to control their free time and enforce a regulated schedule, we can't avoid the occasional accident." Saul remained expressionless on the surface but thought to himself, human nature leans towards freedom, and harsh suppression only triggers strong resistance. No wonder he had noticed a strange phenomenon when entering Kaugus City. During work hours, there were hardly any people out on the streets. Clearly, they were being strictly confined to their jobs. Moreover, these ordinary people couldn't even take on leisurely occupations where they could enjoy life. The image of Kaugus City's lifestyle being so blissful was nothing but a marketing gimmick to attract more laborers. Saul even suspected that the popular book Farmer Little John was just a strategy to draw in people from surrounding villages, only to lead them into a situation where they would be toiling away, lured by an illusion of a better life. Are you asking me to clear the wraiths? Yes. At Baton Academy, there's a specific position called the cleaner. They're responsible for handling the wraiths that arise within the city and the academy. Only the strongest third-rank apprentices and true wizards can take on this task. Pond's expression grew serious. Wraiths can severely affect our work efficiency, productivity, and cause panic among the ordinary people. While we're wizards, if these people start crying and screaming, wanting to leave Kaugus, we can't do much to stop them. Even if we threaten them with their lives to make them stay in Kaugus, their work efficiency will drop dramatically. Pond sighed. This is a lesson Baton Academy learned from past mistakes. From what Pond said, it seemed that there had been cases of ordinary people wanting to escape, but they were suppressed and forced to stay in the city. It seemed that wraiths hadn't just appeared in recent years, but had likely been a hidden threat to Baton Academy for quite some time. However, wraiths were quite rare and difficult to manifest. They usually appeared in places where large-scale death had occurred, or where a wizard's pollution was severe. If it were just an ordinary wizard's living environment, even with frequent research experiments, there would only be vengeful spirits at most. It wouldn't lead to the abundance of wraiths that were clearly bothering Pond. Saul blinked. There were probably even greater secrets hidden within this academy and Kaugus City. This wasn't out of his expectations. After discovering so many magical tools within Kaugus City, he had already suspected that this would lead to some hidden dangers. And with so many wraiths, it was likely that ordinary people were paying the price for such reforms. You don't need to worry. We all understand the dangers of wraiths and won't let you take unnecessary risks. We have regulations in place. The first person to discover a wraith will receive a reward, and the one who handles the wraith will receive even more magical resources. The wraith will also belong to the one who handles it. Saul showed a clear hint of interest this time, and he didn't hesitate for long. So if I become a cleaner, what else would I need to do? Chapter 467, The Case. Cleaners, such an unpleasant name. Penny flew around the sofa in circles, quickly dizzying the little algae who was staring at it. Both Agu and Saul had gone out, though to different destinations. Agu was sitting cautiously on the sofa opposite Saul, maintaining a vigilant posture. It seems that the problems within Kaugus and Baton Academy are more serious than we thought, with a dedicated team now required to clean up wraiths. Agu frowned and analyzed. Anne's gaze wandered, as though recalling something. Ordinary people being in prolonged contact with magic materials and tools is never a good thing. I asked Dean Pond about this matter as well. Saul, still looking down at the documents in his hands, continued. He said that there are barriers to prevent magical and mental pollution in places where ordinary people work with wizards. The most dangerous jobs require a special potion to be taken regularly. Saul raised his hand, shaking the documents he had just received. Their anti-radiation potion is also available for purchase by both wizards and ordinary people. However, the formula for the potion is a closely guarded secret. Agu took the documents from Saul, finding it to be a product list. Various items were listed, ranging from small household tools to large building equipment, everything you could think of. Kaugus still wants to expand. They've already started having wraiths and they want to extend the city's boundaries, Agu questioned. Enough profit and people will take risks. Saul leaned back into the soft sofa. It's not something we can control. He looked at Agu. How did your inspection go today? Agu immediately set the documents aside and said seriously, I used the Blue Pass to check out several nearby factories, residential areas, and shops. I found that to enter public areas, you need to place the pass on a wooden post about waist high. The center of the post has a small magical formation, and you have to pass the formation's verification to enter. I've recorded the formation. Agu took out a piece of paper and spread it open. It contained a magical formation, drawn in regular ink. However, the key nodes of the formation have been concealed, so I couldn't fully replicate it. Saul recalled the product list he had just seen. This formation isn't listed for sale. It must be a core secret of Kaugus. And leaned forward, looking over. The covered part isn't large. From the outside, it seems to have functions for reading and recording. Morden and Herman, who had been staying in the diary, weren't idle either. However, Herman was slower and hadn't yet found the right moment to speak up. Morden had already offered his thoughts. Looking at the structure of this formation, the covered part shouldn't be too complicated, with at most one function. With so many people around, Saul didn't even need to move his body. Everyone's consciousness was piecing the answer together. All right, Agu, you and Anne focus on analyzing the internal structure of the pass these next couple of days. I'll head to Baton Academy to search for more meditation methods and spells. New meditation techniques and spells would definitely require magical crystals or resources for trade. Saul had some money, but he couldn't just rely on that. He was still waiting to see how much profit the cleaner task would bring him. If there weren't many tasks or the rewards were limited, Saul would have to think of other ways to generate income. The ordinary workers in Kaugus had it tough. Most people had their schedules packed, staying at their posts from morning till night without any chance to move. Only a few lucky or especially talented individuals could hold easier, more flexible positions. John from the Brockridge Center was one such person. He had just completed a big deal. A new wizard had rented an entire top floor. Though the commission wasn't as high as when renting a villa or estate, it was still better than the common deal of renting an apartment or having a few people share one. Unfortunately, in John's career, the latter was by far the most common type of transaction. Today, after receiving his commission, he was in high spirits, humming a little tune as he headed to his girlfriend's apartment. She had only recently received a city residence permit and was still quite easy to deceive. Although her face was ordinary, she had an excellent figure. John was planning to buy her some nice food today and, with luck, finally win her over. However, as he stood at the street corner holding 2 big bags of food, his girlfriend still hadn't appeared. It had already been nearly an hour past the agreed-upon time, and the crowd of people heading home had grown sparse. The streetlights were the only company John had. Even in the midst of a romantic relationship, he couldn't help but feel his expression darken. He still didn't have access to his girlfriend's apartment, so he had to wait outside. I'll wait 10 more minutes. If she's not here by then, I'm going home. I'll eat this food myself, John muttered as he glanced at the clock on the opposite building. His right foot tapped impatiently on the ground. Finally, a familiar figure appeared at the street corner. Her brown hair, usually tied neatly in a bun, was now flowing loose, hanging down to her waist. John's girlfriend walked slowly towards the apartment, her arms swaying lightly in front of her. Why are you so late? Didn't we agree to have dinner today? Do you know how long I've been standing here with these bags? I've felt like a fool with people staring at me. As he complained, John's girlfriend passed right by him without responding. This made John's temper flare up. It was as if a rush of anger surged up from his chest. He bit his teeth and, thinking of his grand plan for the night, swallowed the anger. At this moment, his girlfriend had already reached the entrance to the apartment. John hurried to catch up, following her closely. "Did your supervisor scold you again?" John changed his tone, sounding more gentle. "Don't be upset. You're still new, and those wizard tools, even the smallest components, are complicated. It's hard to get the hang of them quickly. Next time I'll talk to your supervisor and ask him to take better care of you." His girlfriend stopped walking and turned to look at him, her eyes still carrying some sadness, though it was now overshadowed by something else. John noticed that his words had worked, so he smiled and lifted the bags. "Look at what I bought for you today, and your favorite honey wine." Her gaze shifted between the two bags, before finally settling on John's smiling face. She gave a soft hum, but her mood still didn't seem fully recovered. John didn't notice this. Eagerly, he followed her steps into the apartment. They took the elevator, went upstairs, entered the small rental room, and closed the door. 3 hours later, when it was fully dark outside, Saul, who had been researching new spells in his room, suddenly received a message about abnormal radiation appearing 3 blocks away, asking him to come check it out. By the time Saul arrived at the designated location, he found himself in front of an apartment building surrounded by a crowd of people. Some of them were frightened, some indifferent, all staring at the entrance of the building, which was surrounded by a white force field. As Saul approached, a man dressed in a blue and white uniform but without silver trim on his collar stepped forward. "Sir, the area has been sealed by the security team. Please do not approach." Saul raised his hand, and a small blue and white badge appeared in his palm. The badge had some complex runes engraved on it, and in the center was Saul's name. This was Saul's identification as a cleaner. "Ah, wizard, please come in." The security guard immediately stepped aside, not daring to examine the badge closely. Saul passed through the translucent white barrier and entered the apartment. Guided by the security personnel, he reached the scene of the incident. It was a small apartment, clearly disordered. The door was wide open, with scattered furniture inside. 2 large bags were knocked over on the floor, revealing vegetables and fruits. A brown bottle lay broken on the floor, and the faint scent of cheap honey wine lingered in the air. Among this slightly chaotic scene, a woman dressed in a tight leather skirt with waist-length white wavy hair was squatting nearby, gazing down at the broken bottle. Her skin was so white it almost seemed to glow. Hearing the footsteps, the woman turned her head, sizing Saul up with interest in her eyes. "Good, everyone's here. We can begin tracking now." Chapter 468, Temporary Teammates. Do we always need several people to act together? Saul walked in and saw a man in the corner of the room, thin to the point of looking like a skeleton. The man was leaning against the wall, with dark circles under his eyes, as though he hadn't slept properly for months. "Of course, it's for safety reasons." The woman pushed herself up from her knees and stood up, a slightly flirtatious smile on her face. "In this mission, we are temporary teammates. Let me introduce myself. I'm Julie, a first-rank wizard specializing in light magic." Although her age was hard to determine, the sultry wizard pointed at the other thin male wizard who had remained silent. "This is Shea, also a first-rank wizard, specializing in thunder magic." Saul nodded and addressed the two. "Saul." "The youngest first-rank wizard in the Western region, Saul, specializing in dark magic, and the apprentice of the Wizard Tower's master Gorsa." Julie crossed her arms, and without applying much force, her breast swelled up impressively. "Don't worry, we not only know your name, but we've also seen your portrait. Only ordinary people and a few reclusive wizards wouldn't recognize you." but it seems your appearance has changed a little." Julie, about the same height as Saul, leaned forward as she spoke, seemingly wanting to take a closer look. As she drew near, Saul could feel a warmth like sunlight after rain emanating from her, which made him feel mentally relaxed. "You look even better in person," Julie said with a smile, her eyes curving. "Get the job done quickly if you want to go to bed. I don't want to waste time here." Shea, who had been hiding in the corner, seemed unable to bear it anymore. He took a few steps toward the center of the room, but still maintained a significant distance from Saul and Julie. He almost pressed himself against the wall as he walked toward the bedroom door. Judging by the static reaction, it's a newly born wraith, possibly just a vengeful spirit. Shea glanced once and immediately looked back at Saul and Julie. "I don't understand why we need 3 wizards for this level of abnormal radiation. Isn't that a waste of resources?" Julie rolled her eyes. "Whenever the situation is unclear, we always bring 3 people. If we have 1 less wizard, we'd need at least 3 third-rank apprentices to make up for 1 full wizard." "Not right," Shea suddenly shouted, catching Saul off guard, who hadn't sensed any danger. "You two are so familiar with each other, you must have known each other before. This must be a trap set against me. I'm quitting this mission." Shea suddenly went crazy, pressing his back against the wall, glaring at Saul and Julie while quickly retreating from the room. Then the sound of hurried footsteps gradually faded away. Saul stared dumbfounded. How did he suddenly come to such a conclusion? Julie slapped her forehead with a sigh and said to Saul, "Shea's got issues. He always thinks someone, after his life, especially when interacting with strangers. You'll get used to him once you're familiar with him." Julie then walked to the bedroom door and peeked inside. But his judgment isn't wrong. It's a newly born wraith, and the danger level isn't high. Julie turned back to Saul, raising an eyebrow. "Now it's just the 2 of us. What do you say? Do you dare to continue the hunt without backup?" Saul stretched his wrist. What's to be afraid of? After all, his backup was always with him. Julie smiled, her eyes softening. "Great, you're to my liking." The 2 of them began searching the room for the missing wraith. Julie closed her eyes and stood in the center of the bedroom, lowering her head, seemingly listening intently. Saul squinted, using a semi-immersive meditation method to observe the traces in the room. He saw large amounts of black smoke on the bed and the floor. The smoke seemed to have been generated by burning, and the granules were quite apparent. The traces of this smoke were heaviest on the bed, as if it had stayed there for a long time. Saul followed the smoke step by step out of the bedroom, then into the hallway. The place where the abnormal radiation appeared was in the room, but now it seems like after the wraith manifested, it suppressed its aura and left the room. Soon, Julie also exited the room, walking straight toward the public restroom on that floor. Unlike Saul, who was tracking by the marks on the ground, she seemed to have known the final location from the start, but was unsure about the journey in between. Finally, the 2 of them almost simultaneously entered the male restroom. They faced a slightly rusted sink. Tusk, really," Julie rubbed her nose. "Although it's become a wraith, it still has a human form. Couldn't it have just taken a normal route?" Saul twisted the faucet, sensing a faint magical aura, and soon clear water began flowing out. "Have someone block the building's water pipes. If this wraith is good at hiding, we might have to search through every single pipe." I can sense the strong emotions up to here. Clearly, the wraith has been somewhat satisfied, which is why the traces faded. It looks like we'll have to do as you suggested and search. Julie bit her lip, obviously not liking this method of pursuit. At that moment, a scream came from downstairs. Saul and Julie exchanged glances, both rushing downstairs. However, Julie ran straight for the stairs, her long white legs moving so quickly that they seemed like a blur. Meanwhile, Saul directly jumped out of the window in the hallway, disregarding the fact that he was on the 20th floor of a high-rise, and leaped down. He didn't use flight magic, but instead waited until he was at the height of the scream before letting little Algie swing him into the corresponding floor. He arrived just in time to see an elderly woman lying on the ground next to the restroom, crawling toward the exit using both hands and feet, her face covered in tears. She was obviously terrified. Inside the restroom, a faucet had been turned on, and a plopping sound was coming from it, as a fleshy, mud-like substance dropped out. Saul walked over and directly removed the faucet. The fleshy substance splashed into a pool, but there were no souls mixed in. Not even fragments. At that moment, Julie also arrived, looking at the scene in the sink. Though she wasn't pale or about to vomit, she clearly wasn't accustomed to such sights. When she saw Saul calmly take out a glass rod to stir the substance, her lips twitched, and she silently thought, "No wonder you're from the Wizard Tower. You're really something." Saul wasn't aware of Julie's thoughts. He had done plenty of research on the human body for his resurrection experiments, and had reviewed many other people's experimental data. This kind of scene no longer elicited any disgust from him. Of course, he didn't like it, but professional research allowed him to temporarily suppress personal preferences. 2 minutes later, Saul cleaned the glass rod, stored it away, and walked out of the restroom. The elderly woman was still staring at the door, looking as if she had been frightened senseless. Saul squatted down and cast a mental soothing spell on her. Julie watched this scene, her eyes flickering. At this point, the guards arrived at that floor, grumbling, "There are still people here." They quickly carried the unconscious elderly woman away. "Did you find anything?" Julie stepped forward. "The fleshy substance is clean," Saul said. "Do you know where these water pipes lead?" Julie's otherwise bright face dimmed slightly. "To the sewer," she paused, her eyes empty. "I should have brought a change of clothes." Chapter 469, Sewage Tunnel Combat. In a large city like Kaugust, if the infrastructure is not well developed, living here would certainly be a tough experience. Fortunately, the city's rulers seem to place considerable importance on these hidden infrastructure facilities. As Saul and Julie entered the underground sewage tunnel, they immediately spotted the magical devices used for diversion and filtration in the main pipeline. One side had clean water, and the other was a muddy pit. "It should be this way," Julie said, pointing to the pipe carrying clean water. Saul nodded. Near the clean water pipeline, he noticed what appeared to be black particles, resembling smoke and dust. Alongside Saul and Julie were two guards from the security team. They held cylindrical lamps that emitted light, which had a certain repellent effect on wraiths. These two weren't here to fight, they were acting in a supportive role. One of the team members held a communicator, exchanged a few words, and then looked up at Saul and Julie. "My lord, the water valves along this main pipeline have all been shut, and the purification facilities have been activated." Having read the guide manual, Saul knew that this purification facility was not a water treatment device, but rather a magical tool designed to prevent contamination from flowing back into the upper structures through the water system. Although this device could only address simple contamination issues, it was a reassuring safety measure for the residents living above. Julie tilted her head toward Saul. "Let's go." As soon as the words left her mouth, her fair skin began to glow. When she leaped into the pipe, she floated on the water's surface like a colorful soap bubble. Saul followed suit, and suddenly, several black tendrils resembling vines sprouted from the back of his neck, stretching out in all directions, lifting him into the air. Little Algie, resembling a large spider, used all its legs to crawl forward, its long legs allowing it to move quickly. In no time, it caught up with Julie, who had set off first. Sensing the shadow behind her, Julie turned around and said, "Wow, every time I work with a wizard specializing in dark magic, I can never tell who the real wraith is." Saul thought to himself, "You haven't seen me transform yet." The two sped along, eventually spotting the wraith's form just before the pipeline was about to merge into an underground reservoir. The wraith was a woman wearing a blue-black work outfit. Her long hair hung loose behind her, giving her a ghostly appearance. She was holding a man's severed head in her hands, and the two of them were whispering, seemingly discussing what to have for dinner. Seeing the man's head, Saul was taken aback and whispered, "Is that him?" Although a few days had passed, Saul still recognized the brokerage man who had shown him around the house. He never expected to meet him again, and in such a changed form. As Saul observed the agent, John, Julie had already launched herself off the water's surface with one foot, charging forward. The wraith, engrossed in her conversation with the man's head, suddenly noticed the movement behind her. She turned around, and her expression instantly shifted from sweet to fierce, as if blaming Julie for disturbing their private moment. Her mouth opened wide, revealing an empty cavity with only a twisted red tongue inside. Julie's palm instantly gathered a dazzling light orb, which she hurled directly at the wraith. The light ball emitted an even more blinding radiance in midair. When it landed on the wraith, it began to scorch her body, causing black smoke to rise. The wraith immediately covered her face in distress, and the severed head in her palm fell with a plop into the water. Saul was about to go help but heard Julie shout, "The man's also suspicious. Go after him." It was Saul's first time on a mission, so he didn't force himself to take the lead. Since Julie asked him to go after the man, she must have the confidence to handle the wraith on her own. Saul immediately instructed little Algie to rise higher and scan the water's surface. He soon detected unusual ripples in the water. He dove down, ready to retrieve the head. Saul initially thought John's head was drifting with the current, but as he got closer, he realized the man was actually trying to swim. From the jagged wound on his neck, numerous fine, insect-like legs sprouted and flailed desperately in the water. It seemed as though he was trying to escape toward the deep water reservoir. But swimming was no match for flying. Saul rose into the air, and a black tendril shot downward toward the water's surface. Once little Algie was submerged, it opened its mouth and immediately lunged toward the man's head, not needing to worry about refraction. However, at that moment, several twisted, claw-like black shadows suddenly grew beneath the head, breaking through the water's resistance and swiftly moving toward little Algie. More wraiths! Saul quickly pulled little Algie back. With his other hand, he thrust it into the water, extending a similar tendril, but this one was light gray and semi-transparent. However, when his tendril made contact with the claw-like shadows, it passed straight through them. Not a wraith, not even a spiritual entity. Saul raised an eyebrow, keeping his tendril aimed at the man's head. The claws suddenly extended several sharp nails, aiming directly at Saul's semi-transparent soul fishing line. Just moments ago, the claws were unable to stop the soul fishing line, but now they had directly torn several deep cuts into the grayish, transparent tendril. The tendril was nearly severed. Switching between material and spiritual attacks in an instant. What kind of creature is this? Saul immediately became alert, and a black touch of torment spell replaced his soul fishing line. The claws continued to strike at Saul's tendril, but were burned by the corrosive damage attached to the touch of torment, sizzling with smoke. Material and spiritual transformation. I can do that too. Ever since Saul realized that his soul fishing line was targeted by the soul toxins of Gyudo, he had used this period of peace to develop a little trick. That was, whenever his soul fishing line was targeted, he would quickly cast Touch of Torment to take the damage in its place. Since the soul fishing line was essentially an extension of his spiritual body, It could also cast spells. At the same time, a burst of destructive power followed the claws, corroding the creature's body. However, the painful corrosive power that entered the claws soon disappeared without a trace. Saul frowned. This thing's true form is huge. He cautiously approached the water surface and finally realized that the claw-like shadows weren't the hands of a wraith or a monster. Instead, they resembled something like tree branches. No, more like tree roots. A tree. Saul suddenly shot upward, his back pressing against the pipe wall. Just as he rose above the water, a gnarled root shot up from beneath the surface. The rough main root had several small, grayish-white rootlets sticking out. They looked like human hands, grabbing the air a couple of times before slowly retreating back into the water. At the same time, the long unopened diary suddenly flipped open. 317th year of the lunar calendar, July 15th. You met a hospitable host who desperately tried to invite you to his residence. One misstep, and you were taken away for a brief moment. From then on, you will gradually go from being a guest to a slave. It was a danger warning. It was very clear, don't be taken away, even for a brief moment. Saul suddenly darted forward, moving 10 meters in a horizontal slide, landing at the bottom of the nearby pipeline. Turning around, he saw several slender, elongated tree roots extending from the gaps in the upper pipe. The root systems were like claws, seemingly trying to grab Saul. The pipes are filled with tree roots, yet there's no leakage. Despite the tension, Saul managed to make a sarcastic comment. He began to use his flying ability and little algae to constantly shift positions, while the gray-white roots continuously broke through the pipe to grab at him. Soon, the pipeline was filled with gray-white roots and black little algae. Although little algae's body could easily be pierced and torn apart by the roots, as the black vines grew more numerous and tightly tangled, even the strongest roots couldn't easily escape the entanglement. Taking advantage of the gaps left by little algae, Saul managed to slip through, all the while holding the wet, severed head of John. At the same time, the insect-like legs sprouting from the wound at the bottom of the head were still twitching, seemingly trying to crawl up Saul's arm. Saul quickly cast a small fireball, burning the legs to ashes and sealing John's wound. Despite being chased by the tree roots earlier, Saul hadn't forgotten his mission. He glanced once more at the mess of vines and roots behind him, then decisively ordered little algae to sever its body and carry John's head as they made a hasty retreat. Chapter 470, Not Familiar. Saul ran back with John's head in hand. He had to regroup with Julie first and figure out what those tree roots were. Why did the diary warn him that not a single bit could be taken away? If that was the case, then during battle he couldn't get injured, couldn't bleed, couldn't even lose a strand of hair. That kind of restriction would be far too limiting. Though it didn't seem like a death warning, it might bring even greater trouble. He quickly checked his soul fishing. Thankfully, it had only been torn, not missing a piece of his soul body. Otherwise, he would have had to figure out how to retrieve it. Little algae was doing fine. As long as the main body remained strong, it didn't care much about losing a few vines. When Saul ordered little algae to leave a clone behind and escape, the diary didn't issue any more warnings. Clearly, only Saul's main body was subject to that particular restriction. The roots behind him didn't give chase. Perhaps they were held up by little algae, or maybe they just didn't dare to follow. Soon Saul saw Julie, who was still in the thick of battle with a wraith. To his surprise, roots had appeared on her side too, though not as many as he had encountered. There were only 2 main root stalks, with finer branches spreading out from them. But Julie's magic didn't seem particularly effective against this type of plant-based monster. One of her legs was already bruised and swollen, tightly constricted by the roots. Though the roots showed signs of being scorched, they hadn't broken. Meanwhile, floating on the surface of the water was a long-haired woman, paper-thin like a sheet of parchment. She had been glaring venomously at Julie, but the moment Saul appeared, her eyes flipped upward to lock onto him, and the head in his hand. Yahh! The wraith let out a piercing scream, releasing a visible psychic shockwave towards Saul. Pure spiritual force attack. Saul wasn't afraid of that, especially not from a newly formed wraith. He simply vibrated his mental form, easily dispelling the attack. Wary of the roots, Saul didn't use soul fishing. Instead, he used Touch of Torment to viciously smack the wraith into the water. But because the water buffered the blow, the wraith wasn't dispersed. After sinking, it floated back up again, glaring at Saul with even more hatred. With Saul now engaging the wraith, Julie could finally breathe a little and focus on breaking free from the roots. While pretending to be locked in battle with the wraith, Saul kept an eye on Julie's side. He noted that the roots didn't seem intent on stealing her soul or limbs. Taking advantage of the roots being preoccupied with Julie, Saul concealed himself in his soul fishing during the next round of combat. Against soul forms not stronger than himself, that move was incredibly effective and could end the fight quickly. So, when Julie finally tore free from the roots, Saul was already calling for retreat. "It's handled, let's go. These roots are really tough to cut through." He repeated the same tactic he used earlier, throwing out little algae to block the roots. The gnarled, claw-like roots here didn't pursue either. After a few twists and turns through the tunnels, the noise behind them finally stopped. Julie exhaled deeply and stood on the water's surface, looking up at Saul hovering midair. "You ran into those strange root-like monsters too." "Yeah. And that severed head that ran off." Here, Saul pulled out the wraith jar he'd stored away. "It hasn't fully turned into a wraith, more like it's teetering between a wraith and a vengeful spirit." Even so, you still got something out of this." Julie's expression sank. Originally, she had told Saul to chase after the head with the intention of keeping the actual wraith to herself and leaving the not quite there spirit for Saul to handle. These newly formed, not yet powerful wraiths had a decent capture rate. In these cleaner missions, the Academy's reward was just the surface prize. What everyone really wanted were intact wraiths. Whether for experimentation or resale, they were highly valuable magic materials. She hadn't expected those eerie tree roots to show up halfway and derail her efforts. Not only had she failed to capture the wraith, she'd nearly been caught herself. Julie had been so focused on escaping the roots, she hadn't noticed how Saul had dealt with the wraith. But in her mind, if he'd finished it so quickly, he must have just destroyed it outright. In the end, her selfishness had handed Saul the prize. He was the only one who got something out of it. Julie had heard that Saul had also run into those strange roots, but didn't know the number and scale he faced was several times her own. She assumed the head was easier to deal with, and that's why Saul managed to escape the roots and capture the vengeful spirit at the same time. Although she'd still receive some magic crystals or resources from the Academy for completing the mission, to her, that wasn't nearly enough. Julie's eyes glinted as she lightly licked her lips. "No way, I have to get something out of tonight too." She flew up to hover beside Saul. "You had a pretty fruitful night, shouldn't we celebrate?" Saul blinked. Even if he were to celebrate, what did that have to do with Julie? Why was she suddenly so enthusiastic? "Your place or mine?" Julie twisted her waist seductively, winking at him. A fresh, grassy scent, like the air after rain, spread through the underground waterway. Saul furrowed his brow, momentarily unable to understand what Julie meant. Was she asking to split the spoils? "Well, big brother Saul, finally another beauty taking interest in you. Who cares whose place? Just push her down. If you're in a hurry, even right here works. I promise I'll cover my eyes and not peek." Penny's chattering voice rang in his ears, finally making Saul realize what Julie's words had been implying. No, scratch that, it wasn't even a hint. She was practically spelling it out. Saul was speechless. "Big brother Saul, are you shy? Let me help. Little Algie, go, just like those tree roots earlier, tie up this woman." Feeling a strange movement on the back of his neck, Saul immediately barked in his mind, "Little Algie, don't listen to Penny's nonsense." Then he scolded the nightmare butterfly, "Penny, stop corrupting little Algie." Because he was too busy disciplining his two pets, Saul hadn't answered right away. Julie, feeling pleased, assumed Saul was just a bashful boy, so nervous he couldn't even talk. But in the next second, a cold response came from Saul's mouth. "Not interested." It took Julie a full 2 seconds to realize Saul was rejecting her. "Why?" she asked, baffled. Wizards, though often eccentric, were generally indulgent when it came to pleasure, with their exalted status and lack of societal restrictions. They rarely said no to enjoyment, especially with each other. This wasn't some maid or noble girl we were talking about. Saul shrugged. "I guess I've got a bit of a persecution complex, especially bad with strangers." And with that, he turned and walked away. Julie stood there, her chest rising and falling with frustration, but after a few seconds, she suddenly smiled again. This Saul, even though he mainly practices dark element magic, there's no rot in him. His body should be fine, could it be? He's just shy because it's his first time. She bit her lip with a smile, flicked her hair with one hand, and her white curls shimmered against her pearl-like skin. "Not familiar. Well then, we'll just have to get familiar." Chapter 471, No Good People. After returning, Saul and Julie immediately reported the strange underground routes to the academy. The academy took it seriously and quickly sent someone to report to the dean. Saul, having just received his reward, was now browsing the exchange list in the mission hall. Most of the wraiths and vengeful spirits on this mission had been dealt with by Saul, so Julie had voluntarily given him the majority of the contribution points. The mission hall of Baton Academy functioned similarly to the registry room in the Wizard Tower. It also calculated points and allowed item exchanges. There was a wide variety of missions here, from exterminating wraiths like Saul's task, to research on experimental subjects, and even public outreach assignments. He wasn't interested in these miscellaneous tasks. His focus was entirely on the exchange list, checking what items could be redeemed. Since he had rejected Dean Pond's invitation, he wasn't considered an internal member of the academy, which limited what he could exchange. Right from the start, Saul flipped directly to the sections on meditation methods. But after looking for a while, he found that either the methods listed were ones he'd already seen and didn't suit him, or they were beginner techniques suitable only for first or second rank apprentices, far too basic to replace the erosion diagram. While flipping through the list, Saul noticed a figure approaching. He quickly closed the book and looked up. To his surprise, it was that Shea, the same guy who had backed out right at the beginning of today's mission. Wasn't this the paranoid one who always thought someone was trying to kill him? And now he was approaching a stranger like Saul on his own. Though calling it an approach wasn't quite accurate, Shea stopped 5 meters away from Saul. "You're actually still alive. Julie's alive too," Shea muttered thoughtfully. "Looks like you're not bad for a rookie, but I advise you to behave. Don't even think about trying to plot against me." Sparks crackled lightly across Shea's body, though unlike Monica, they didn't scorch his skin. Saul put down the list and tilted his head. Being overly cautious and overthinking things that can be dangerous too. Shea had intended to leave after speaking, but stopped in his tracks at Saul's comment. "What do you mean, what danger?" "What you're showing resembles a condition I once read about in a book, paranoia. Mild cases lead to overthinking and insomnia. Severe cases cause hallucinations and make it hard to distinguish dreams from reality. Saul smiled. In truth, he didn't know much about paranoia or its symptoms. But with a stubborn, paranoid person like this, sometimes playing along was more effective. Shea stuttered, what Saul described. He did suffer from most of those symptoms. Someone as obsessed with staying alive, as he would naturally be terrified of any possible illness. Just as he took a step forward to ask more, a shadowy figure dashed into the mission hall like the wind, scanned the room, and stepped in between Shea and Saul. It was Jonah, the Dark Element wizard from Baton Academy. I heard you caught a wraith. Want to sell it? He asked directly. No, Saul answered bluntly. He earned magic crystals to run experiments, and wraiths and vengeful spirits were key materials for those. Of course he wasn't going to trade them away for money. Saul had no interest in giving up a watermelon for a sesame seed. Jonah was about to speak again when another person interrupted. A Dark Element wizard like Saul wouldn't sell a wraith to you, would he? The newcomer was a tall, broad-shouldered man with reddish-brown skin. When he spoke, small flames flickered between his teeth. Clearly a Fire Element wizard, and a powerful one at that. He turned to Saul and said, "Hello, I'm Kent, a first-rank Fire Element wizard. Julie already told me about you and what happened on your mission today. Don't worry, the Academy will expedite the investigation. I hope we'll have a chance to do a mission together someday." Kent nodded politely to Saul, then transformed into a ball of flame and swaggered off. Once Kent had gone, Jonah, still not giving up, repeated his question. You really won't sell it? No, Saul replied firmly again. HMPH, fine, don't sell it, Jonah scoffed, then vanished like a gust of wind. With Jonah gone, Saul was about to return to browsing the exchange list when he realized Shea was still lingering nearby. Shea looked like he wanted to say something but hesitated. Eventually, he worked up the courage to reduce their distance to just 3 meters. That illness you mentioned earlier, how do you treat it? Does it require any special magic materials? Shea squinted at Saul suspiciously. He figured if Saul pulled out a vial and said, "Coincidentally, I have the cure right here, just 999 magic coins," he'd walk away on the spot. But Saul didn't even look up. I'm not a healer, how would I know how to treat it? That answer actually put Shea a little at ease. Then which book did you read about it in? Saul flipped a page, can't remember. Shea rubbed his hands together. Got any suggestions then? Maybe go talk to Julie. She seems pretty skilled at emotion-based magic. She might be able to help you relax a little. What? Let Julie cast spells on me? Not a chance. What if she uses the opportunity to hurt me? Shea rejected the idea instantly. Then maybe find someone wise and experienced to chat with, Saul said offhandedly. He closed the exchange list and waved over a uniformed apprentice. This list, are these really the only items outsiders can redeem? There's no other channel for trades. The apprentice bowed respectfully. Apologies, sir. This is everything currently available for external exchange. However, if you're looking for something in particular, you can post a request through us. If someone else happens to have what you're after, they might be willing to trade. Thanks, I'll consider it. Saul handed back the list and stood up. Shea was still lost in thought, out of the corner of his eye. He noticed Saul getting up and instinctively took 3 steps back. As Saul walked away, he suddenly heard Shea's voice in his mind via transmission spell. Kent is one of the strongest first-rank wizards in the Academy. He's usually the team leader on big missions, but he's not a good person. Jonah never likes to fight, always hiding in the lab. He spends all his reward points from lectures and research on buying wraiths. Definitely not a good person. Julie's favorite trick is manipulating emotions, stirring people's feelings. She'll make you think you've fallen for her. Not a good person either. Shea spoke rapidly, giving Saul a rundown of the people he'd recently encountered. Without breaking stride, Saul replied via transmission spell, "And what about you?" "Me, anyone who tries to hurt me, I'll kill them." After a pause, Shea sent one more line. "There are no good people here, only the living and the dead." Chapter 472, The Dark Spirit Blade and the Eye of the Abyss. In the days that followed, Saul took part in several more missions with the Cleansers. Each mission required at least 3 wizards. Although Baton Academy covered a vast area and had a large population, there were few wizards with formidable combat prowess who also enjoyed confronting wraiths head-on. Most people here preferred conducting research in laboratories. As a result, after completing several missions, Saul began seeing the same familiar faces repeatedly. During this period, Julie came looking for Saul multiple times, but each time he turned her away. It wasn't that Saul was entirely averse to developing deeper relationships with other female wizards. He just preferred to steer clear of wizards who could stir up emotions so easily. When Saul wasn't out on missions, he holed himself up in his newly rented rooftop room, conducting experiments. The frequency of wraith appearances in Kaugus City was clearly abnormal. Saul believed it was being influenced by some unknown factor. Thus, he began investigating the trigger that caused souls to turn into wraiths. He wasn't doing this to solve the city's underlying problems, but rather to carry out a long-planned experiment, soul armament. The 2 abnormal soul bodies he had captured, John and his girlfriend, served as both experimental material and subjects. John, in particular, stood at the border between vengeful spirit and wraith, making him an especially rare opportunity to observe the transformation process into a wraith. Once Saul figured out what triggered the creation of wraiths, or at least identified the factors most likely to cause soul contamination and mental disarray, he could begin modifying the 4 consciousnesses in the diary. Even Morden, the strongest among them, was still lacking in combat capability. They couldn't cast large-scale spells, and the tiny amount of magic within their vessels wasn't enough to sustain prolonged battles. Under normal circumstances, this might have sufficed, but Saul was about to venture into the borderland. He had to do everything in his power to enhance his combat ability. At the same time, Saul also began studying the knowledge left to him by second-rank wizard Jassim right before his death. That little black worm hiding deep in his mental realm had always been suppressed by the diary and the mental platform. It wasn't until Saul actively investigated it that he discovered its secrets. After a few days of study, he discovered the worm was a highly unusual soul fragment. It worked by splitting off a portion of one's own soul, using it to carry a piece of consciousness into another person's mental realm. Through this method, the inheritor could instantly grasp certain knowledge, or come to understand some hidden truth. But when Saul understood the principles behind it, he merely scoffed and felt no gratitude toward Jassim's so-called gift. The reason? This kind of spell carried massive hidden dangers, and the risks were deeply embedded. Once Jassim passed the knowledge on to Saul, he himself lost all memory of that information. While he could relearn it later through external means, if no one reminded him, he might forget it forever. Jassim had already resolved to die at that point, so he had no reason to worry. But the spell posed significant risks to Saul as well. While Saul could absorb Jassim's knowledge through the soul fragment, he was also forced to take in Jassim's other thoughts and intentions. In other words, if Jassim had infused the fragment with even a trace of his own worldview, beliefs, or obsessions, Saul might slowly start becoming someone like him. It was a subtle, gradual influence. At first, perhaps not strong enough to change the recipient's decisions. But over time, it would take root like a seed, slowly altering the recipient's thoughts. If not discovered and removed in time, the person's character might be drastically reshaped. A murderous tyrant might turn into someone who couldn't help but give to every beggar they saw. When Jassim calmly went to his death, Saul had already realized that the man must have held incredibly strong convictions. And people like that, could they really pass on their knowledge without also passing on their ideals? With that in mind, Saul decided not to absorb the knowledge directly, but that didn't mean he was going to abandon the inheritance. Thanks to the diary, he had another method. He filtered the soul fragment. He directly infused the inheritance into the black page, where Guido resided. The originally weak Guido immediately grew several times stronger after merging with the soul fragment. Then, under Saul's command and the diary's control, Guido repeated the knowledge he had gained word for word to Saul. As Saul expected, Jassim's inheritance was precisely the powerful black blade he had once wielded in frontal combat, Dark Spirit Blade. It was a formidable dark element spell capable of striking both soul bodies and physical ones. Moreover, it could split into hundreds of fragments to attack multiple enemies simultaneously. Of course, the fragments weren't as powerful as the complete blade, but Jassim was a top-tier second-rank wizard. Just one fragment could kill a third-rank apprentice, and several combined could take out a first-rank wizard of average strength. It was an exceptionally powerful dark element spell, and it was perfect for Saul, who still lacked a truly destructive offensive spell. However, just as Saul was happily copying the spell's rune structure, Guido, having absorbed Jassim's inheritance, suddenly began speaking to himself, completely disregarding the consumption of soul energy. Ah, so that's how it is. I finally understand why the tribunal sent people to hunt us. So much manpower and resources, just to chase a few first-rank wizards. Sigh, maybe if I had known sooner, I would have just gone back willingly. No, maybe I would have gone mad with fear and started causing chaos. Jassim was truly admirable, to know all this and still calmly hunt us down. Maybe that's the reason he became a top-tier second rank. Without that kind of unwavering conviction, how could anyone break through the barrier between first and second rank? By this point, Saul had finished transcribing the entire, intricate rune structure of the spell. He had filled over 20 sheets of parchment. If he added his subsequent breakdowns and personal insights, it would be enough to compile into a full spell book. But Saul didn't continue. He stared at Guido's self-muttering, a trace of doubt in his expression. Jassim's knowledge, what else was hidden inside it? He brought with him the secret behind the founding of the tribunal. What is it? You seem quite moved by it. The secret behind the founding of the tribunal. Saul raised an eyebrow. For the first time, a consciousness in the diary had avoided answering him directly. Was it because the soul fragment Jassim injected had truly affected the consciousness? Or was the consciousness itself resisting the diary's control? Either way, Saul had to get to the bottom of it. I order you to state the secret directly. Aye. Guido's white script began to distort. Clearly, he was struggling to resist Saul's command. Cracks began to form across the black page. This had never happened before. But in the end, the diary prevailed. Guido's writing, as though penned by a hand under duress, began appearing in jagged, stretched strokes, as if the hand had trembled violently. The tribunal was founded because the eye of the abyss is expanding. To halt its spread, But Guido's writing stopped abruptly, because with a loud crack, the entire black page shattered. Saul stared in stunned silence as the fragments crumbled into black dust, which was slowly absorbed into the eerie starry void within the consciousness. In the end, he had failed to uncover the secret of the tribunal. It was the first time the diary had failed to control an awareness sealed within a black page. and it made Saul finally realize the true power of the tribunal. The Eye of the Abyss, Saul murmured softly. He recalled that enormous sinkhole on the far side of the planet. It seemed to reach deep into the planetary core. Other than that, Saul couldn't think of anything else that could possibly live up to the ominous name, Eye of the Abyss. The Eye of the Abyss is expanding. Chapter 473, The Evolution Diagram. Guido's consciousness vanished just like that. Saul felt a bit regretful. He hadn't fully unearthed all of Guido's secrets yet. The information regarding the tribunal and the Eye of the Abyss cast a shadow over Saul's heart, but he quickly set the matter aside. There were no prompts from the diary. Clearly, no matter how dangerous the Eye of the Abyss might be, it wasn't something that posed a threat to him right now. As for the tribunal, it obviously had high-ranking wizards within its ranks. Let the high-ranking wizards worry about apocalyptic disasters. All Saul needed to do was keep improving himself and continue unlocking the functions of the diary. Now there were 2 more empty black pages in the diary. Who would be the next lucky soul to take residence? Half a month later, Saul once again joined a wraith-hunting mission. This time, the security squad had been notified a bit too late. By the time they arrived, the wraith had already killed 3 people, and the souls of those 3 had already been corrupted and taken away by the wraith. Because it was suspected that there might be up to 4 wraiths involved, Wizard Kent joined them halfway. But even with 4 true wizards on the scene, they still lost track of the first wraith. At the street corner already sealed off with warning tape, the 4 stood side by side. Shea, as always, stood the farthest from the other 3, coldly glaring at Kent. Kent, you were so confident you could chase down the most powerful wraith, and now you've lost it. Was this on purpose, letting it go so it could come after me later? After a few encounters with Saul, Shea had finally agreed to team up with him on a wraith hunt. Though to Saul, it didn't matter who his teammates were. Kent, still recovering from battle, had his upper clothes burnt to ashes. His pants, however, seemed specially made. Despite the heat, they were only slightly deformed, not enough to leave him completely naked. His expression darkened. He glared at Shea. Enough. If I wanted to kill you, I'd do it directly. Why would I go through the trouble of secretly releasing some ordinary? Shea sneered. HMPH, you're just scared of the Dean. That's the only reason you don't dare act out in the open. Kent rolled his eyes. I'm not wasting time arguing with you. He waved the nearby security squad over and led them away. Another wizard who had just captured a vengeful spirit wore an excited look on his face. Seeing that no one was paying attention to him, he quietly slipped away too, probably afraid someone might try to snatch his prize. Saul turned, preparing to leave as well. He didn't think Shea would have anything pleasant to say to him, when suddenly Shea called out. I heard you're looking for a dark element meditation diagram. Saul paused and turned to him. You have one. Shea tilted his head. Let's talk back at the academy. Half an hour later, the 2 of them maintained a 3-meter social distance as they arrived at Baton Academy's mission hall. There was always someone on duty here. The hall was brightly lit, and a few wizard apprentices lingered near the mission board. Saul and Shea headed straight for a semi-enclosed booth. I have a meditation diagram that's especially suited for dark element wizards. What do you want in exchange? Saul asked directly. Even while seated, Shea's posture suggested he was ready for battle at any moment. I know you've captured quite a few wraiths and vengeful spirits over the past month, but I noticed you've never turned them into the academy for materials. Is that not allowed? Saul lowered his gaze. The wraiths he captured were used to sustain his 4 consciousness entities, and the rest were used for experiments. There were simply none left to trade with the academy for resources. Though by completing wraith hunting missions, he still earned magic crystals. That income alone was enough to cover his daily needs. Not every true wizard was skilled in combat. Most spent years shut away in laboratories, researching whatever subjects interested them while seeking ways to advance further. The wraiths you caught are yours, of course. I'm not questioning that. But the fact you've caught so many and never sold a single one shows that you have a way to restrain them and a way to store them. Shea leaned forward slightly. I want your method for suppressing wraiths. Saul leaned back, savoring the comfort of the chair. Let me see your meditation diagram first. Shea was clearly surprised. Saul was being this bold, not revealing a single thing before seeing the diagram. After thinking it over for a moment, Shea conjured a scroll in his palm and slid it across the table to Saul. This is the mission hall. If you dare try to steal it, I can call over 10 true wizards in no time. Unfazed, Saul dragged the scroll toward himself. How do I open it? Stand it upright and twist the locking ring on top clockwise. Following Shea's instructions, Saul stood the scroll upright. It had a uniform color and shape, with no markings of any kind. He casually opened it. The moment the locking ring was removed, the upright scroll suddenly unfurled in all directions, forming a circular shape. On this circular medium, a diagram had been etched with astonishingly fine and lifelike strokes. The diagram resembled the erosion diagram, but it didn't just depict people turning into monsters. The image showed people, sinister black shadows, upright walking octopus-like creatures, and distorted beams of light. The 4 clearest symbols were positioned symmetrically around the circular edge. Near the circumference, those 4 figures moved in a clockwise direction, transforming bit by bit into the next figure in the cycle. This time, Saul could clearly observe how each figure gradually evolved into the next. Closest to him was the clearest depiction, a sinister black shadow, its arms raised as if preparing to pounce like a ferocious specter. The specter then morphed into a human, the human into a monster, the monster into light, and finally the light back into a specter. Just then, Shea pressed a hand against the edge of the table and pushed downward. The table tilted, and the circular diagram slid neatly back into Shea's hands. This meditation diagram is called the evolution diagram. You've seen it now, so do you want to trade? He began reassembling the scroll as he quietly observed Saul. Saul's fingers tapped rhythmically against the tabletop. A quiet, tense atmosphere slowly spread. At last, Saul looked up. I think you've misunderstood my abilities. I did capture some wraith and spirits, but I never intended to store them long-term. The wraiths I caught, I've already dealt with them. Shea frowned, then suddenly stood up, clearly about to walk out. Even though he'd shown the diagram to Saul, the short time they'd had wasn't nearly enough for Saul to fully internalize the image into his mental realm, so Shea wasn't worried about it being stolen. A wizard's meditation diagram couldn't be memorized through brute force. It had to be fully redrawn, over and over again, in the mental realm to be retained. I may not have any special method for restraining wraiths, Saul said calmly, but why don't you just say what it is you actually want? Sneaking around, hiding things, it won't solve anything. Shea's foot, just about to step out, paused, and after a moment he turned back. I'm interested in the evolution diagram, yes, but it's not the only meditation diagram suitable for Dark Element wizards. Even if it's not on the Mission Hall's trade list, I can get Wizard Jonah to trade with me. I believe that as long as I have enough wraiths, he'd be happy to offer me several Dark Element diagrams. Seeing that Shea was seriously thinking it over, Saul smiled and added, but I have to admit, I'm very interested in the evolution diagram. So let's not waste each other's time. Let's speak plainly. Wizard Shea, whose main specialization is lightning element magic. Your magic naturally counters wraiths, yet you're looking for additional means to fight them. Why is that? What is the real reason, and where is that wraith exactly? With that, Saul folded his arms and rested his chin atop them, silently waiting for Shea's answer. But inside, his inner monologue was roaring. "I'll just say yes already. If you don't, I swear I'll just steal it. The evolution diagram, I must get my hands on it." Chapter 474, Whose Garbage Taste Is That? Saul was determined to get his hands on the evolution diagram. The moment he laid eyes on that meditation diagram, he was certain it shared the same lineage as the erosion diagram, and it suited his current main study path perfectly. Unlike most Dark Element wizards, Saul's focus was on the soul. This was a much more difficult path than researching corpses and flesh, one that no one without some sort of cheat would dare to take. Even if Saul could exchange for a suitable Dark Element meditation diagram from Wizard Jonah, it would never be as compatible as the erosion diagram. Shea was still hesitating, but Saul could tell he was already tempted. It was just that his long-held cautious nature made it hard for him to take that final step. "I know Wizard Shea is afraid of death," Saul continued to pitch his case, "but the more you fear something, the more likely it is to come. Running away won't solve the real problem." He was still thinking about what kind of motivational drivel he could throw out next when Shea suddenly returned to his seat. Before speaking, he raised a hand and activated a protective barrier, then used a transmission spell to communicate with Saul. "I'm being haunted by a rather terrifying wraith," Shea said. His face was pale and beads of sweat gathered like beans on his forehead. Wraiths, much like wizards, varied in strength. The newly born, weaker ones typically had the power of a third-rank apprentice and could easily be eliminated by a true wizard. But certain unique wraiths, those that had existed for a long time or were heavily polluted, could turn around and kill a true wizard. When Saul heard this, his eyes narrowed as he swept his gaze over Shea from head to toe. He didn't find any traces of a wraith on Shea, but the man didn't look like he was lying either. Saul could only lament how the erosion diagram's semi-immersive meditation method was becoming less and less effective. "You're trying to sense the wraith on me, aren't you? It's no use. You won't see it. Even I, who specialize in lightning magic, can only see it at certain times. Only visible at specific times. When do you see it then?" Shea pressed his lips together. "When I'm dreaming." According to him, he had been haunted by this dream wraith for over 2 years. Every time he dreamt, he would find himself in a narrow, freezing room filled with people, but every face was a blur. He walked beside them, pushed and squeezed on all sides. Even if he wanted to stop, he couldn't. Constant shuffling, constant pressure. A soft, rustling sound always lingered in his ears, and the path ahead stretched endlessly with no clear end. "In the dream, I can't move according to my own will. I just mechanically follow the crowd forward. But deep down, I feel an overwhelming terror. Something tells me that continuing forward will lead to total destruction." It seemed to be his first time talking to anyone about this. Shea's expression was distant, almost dazed. "Every time, I wake up by forcing myself out of the dream, and that's why I've become afraid to sleep at all." Saul understood. Although wizards could replace sleep with deep meditation, real sleep was still essential. If Shea hadn't slept properly in 2 years, it was no wonder his nerves were shot and his body was so thin. Before the dream started, did anything strange happen? "I know you might not believe me, but really nothing special." Shea gave a bitter smile. "I've been at Baton Academy for over a decade. I've been on plenty of wraith hunts, but when the dreams started, I hadn't participated in any for over 2 months." "Then how can you be sure that the nightmares are caused by a wraith, and not just mental stress?" "Because shortly after the dreams began, there was one time I didn't turn in a captured wraith. I kept it for an experiment. That night, though I didn't intend to sleep, I dozed off anyway, and that wraith appeared in my dream. Shaya's cheek twitched. The people around me suddenly went mad. They all charged at the wraith and devoured it. When I woke up, I rushed to the lab next door and found the wraith that had been sealed in the jar was really gone. Just dreaming shouldn't make a wraith disappear. Saul began to suspect that Shaya might have been sleepwalking. Seeing Saul's expression, Shaya seemed to guess what he was thinking. After that, I ran more experiments. I placed wraiths in a lab next to mine and set up multiple inescapable magic formations. If anyone entered, there would be traces left behind. But each time I woke up, the wraith would be gone, and there was never a mark on the formations. Watching Saul frown deeply, Shaya's heart grew uneasy. This was his first time sharing his story, and laying his soul bare like this made him feel incredibly vulnerable. After a pause, Saul suddenly asked, "When those people in your dream rushed up to devour the wraith, what were you doing?" Shaya froze, his expression beginning to twist. He suddenly shot to his feet and tried to cancel the protective barrier and leave. But just as he raised his hand, a shadow lashed out toward him. It was a massive black tentacle. He jumped back instantly, lightning crackling in his hand, but his back struck something soft. Turning to look, he saw another tentacle pressing against him. It wasn't attacking, just restraining. "Relax," Saul said gently from his seat across the table. "I'm only doing a preliminary check. If you really want to resolve this wraith issue, then stop hiding things at crucial moments." Shaya's face darkened. He raised his hand to press down on the tentacle behind him, but the tentacle immediately withdrew without resistance. "Shouldn't you ask for permission before doing a scan?" "Sorry, but you keep dodging, and I don't like wasting time," Saul replied as he withdrew both tentacles. Just now, he had concealed soul fishing within his touch of torment, but still found no trace of a wraith on Shaya. Could that wraith really exist only in his dreams? Looking at the bristling Shaya, Saul suddenly suggested, "Shaya, could you fall asleep in front of me? Just once." Shaya looked like he was about to explode on the spot. After being sneak attacked by Saul, now he was being asked to sleep in front of him. Who was dreaming now? Yet half an hour later, Shaya was leading Saul into his villa, his mind dazed. "Have I gone insane? I actually brought a guy who might kill me back home, just so he can watch me sleep." Maybe it was the 2 years of torment that had worn him down. After Saul agreed to a series of conditions, Shaya somehow agreed. He led Saul into his lab and began setting up multiple linked magical formations, one to protect himself, and one to trap Saul. If Saul tried to break free, it would create a loud disturbance, waking Shaya immediately. And since Shaya stood at a key point in the formation, he could use it to launch a deadly counterattack at any moment. Watching Saul stroll casually into the trap meant for himself, Shaya's face scrunched up like a wad of paper. For someone as perpetually paranoid as Shaya, he simply couldn't understand how Saul dared to step into that binding circle. All it would take was a single thought, and Shaya could seal the formation and attack from the outside, enough to kill. He couldn't help but wonder, was Saul truly unafraid of a fellow first-rank wizard's attack? The confidence was ridiculous. That thought only made Shaya more uneasy. Could this all be part of a larger trap? Was Saul planning to kill him and loot his home? After wrestling with himself for a while, the hope of escaping the nightmare finally won out. In the end, Shaya activated both formations as agreed. It was his impulsive confession that had led to Saul offering to help. If he missed this chance, who knew how long it would take to muster the courage to tell anyone else? Nervously, Shaya stepped into the protective circle and lay down on the ground. Turning his head to speak the cue, "You can begin," he suddenly saw a giant pink couch appear out of thin air behind Saul. That couch looked very soft and comfy. He looked at Saul, hands resting on his abdomen, body sunk into the cushions, then back at the cold stone floor beneath him. Shea, who the hell needs sleep here? That tacky pink, whose garbage taste is that? Chapter 475, The Invisible One. The reason Saul was lying so comfortably was because he was about to enter the dream as well. As for what Shea across from him might think, Saul couldn't care less. The moment Shea, who had gone without natural sleep for a long time, closed his eyes, he quickly sank into slumber. Saul followed suit and shut his eyes. Penny landed gently on Saul's head, and then a pair of silver, metallic, hollow wings suddenly unfurled from behind his back. With a light tremor of the wings, Saul's consciousness seemed to traverse through thousands of worlds. When he opened his eyes again, he saw pitch-black darkness before him. He had been inside many people's dreams before, even the dreams of monsters. Most were bizarre and fantastical, amalgamations of thoughts and desire. But this dream was utterly dark, no objects around, no boundaries in sight. As if the dream's master desired nothing and wanted nothing. This isn't it. Saul withdrew his gaze, not bothering to explore further. The metallic wings behind him gave a sudden jolt, and the scenery around him changed completely. This time, Saul arrived in a dim, narrow room, surrounded front and back by a bustling crowd. They were packed tightly together, pushing and shoving their way forward. The end of the room was far, far away, where a tiny point of light seemed to mark an exit toward brightness. Dreams often defy logic, but no one's dreams appear without cause or reason. Within the long-flowing crowd, Saul found Shea, his face full of terror. He was clearly resisting, but the people pressed too tightly for him to move his limbs. He could only inch forward with the crowd. All of the humanoid shapes were headed toward the distant point of light, but only Shea seemed to have sensed something. He alone wanted to stop, even turn back against the current. The entire room was empty. Aside from the walls, there were no decorations, no places to hide. The only possible place something could lurk was within the crowd itself. Saul closely observed the blurry, faceless figures near Shea. In the dark room, even the outlines of the figures were indistinct. They didn't seem to have their own will, only marching endlessly toward the far-off light. Shea was like a fallen leaf in a flood. Though he wouldn't sink, he could only be carried helplessly by the current. Yet Saul searched the entire crowd and found nothing threatening. So where was the supposed wraith of this dream? Could it be that there was no wraith at all, just the delusions of a paranoid man? Though Saul felt nothing, Shea seemed more and more terrified. Saul could hear his breathing grow heavy. He was struggling to escape the dream. The dream itself was growing unstable. The straight walls turned to waves, and the figures pushing Shea began to change. They no longer looked human, but rather monstrous in ways that defied description. There's nothing special about the room. It's likely shaped from Shea's own cognition. Those figures are strange, but aside from looking scary, they haven't harmed his soul body. Could a first-rank wizard really go 2 years without sleep just because of a nightmare? The dream grew increasingly chaotic, clearly on the verge of collapse. If he wakes up just like this, then the trip was a waste. And if Shea is frightened again in his dream, he might refuse to sleep ever again. Maybe I should just do as he wishes, kill him and steal the evolution diagram. Saul chuckled to himself at the thought. Heh, perhaps emotions are amplified in dreams. Saul heard himself laugh out loud. Heh, heh, perhaps emotions are amplified in dreams. Saul heard himself laugh out loud. Heh, perhaps. Saul suddenly lunged forward. He had just realized that he nearly repeated the same motion, the same thought 3 times. This dream really is off, even if there's no wraith. Something is definitely hiding in here. Though the dream was collapsing, Saul continued to move. He wasn't just trying to find the hidden horror, but also avoid falling into a loop without noticing. He moved above Shea and tried calling out to him, Shea. But the latter kept struggling, seeing Saul right in front of him, yet not reacting. "He's not ignoring me. He can't see me at all," Saul confirmed it. He realized that Shea couldn't perceive him, even when he was mere inches away, which meant he might also be unable to see other things just as close. Saul closed his eyes, and upon opening them, his entire body changed dramatically. His muscles morphed like clay, squeezed and reshaped by invisible hands. In just a few breaths, he transformed from a 15-year-old boy into a man in his early 30s. In this state, Saul's soul form vibrated at an extremely high frequency. His body and soul both undergoing drastic changes, he became a different person entirely. When he opened his eyes, he saw arms draped over his shoulders. The arms were thin and pale, like those of a sickly patient hanging limply. At the same time, he felt a cold breath against his ear, like it slipped into his brain through the ear canal. Saul slowly turned his gaze to the right. A pale-faced man had rested his head askew on Saul's right shoulder. The corners of the man's mouth were pulled up in a grin that nearly reached his eyes. Only then did Saul realize there had been someone clinging to his back the whole time. And this person looked exactly like the 15-year-old version of Saul. A chill crept into Saul's heart, though he also found it a little funny. While he had been watching Shea struggle among the human figures, he himself had long been entangled by another human figure. And the reason he hadn't noticed was because this Saul had synchronized with him. He had mistaken this other Saul as part of himself. Saul abruptly reached up, grabbing the familiar face by the cheek and trying to pull the person around to the front. But as soon as he exerted force, the face exploded with a pop, red blood and white pulp splattering across Saul's body and face. But it didn't end there. Suddenly sensing something, Saul looked down. He saw faces emerging between his arms, through his fingers, beside his waist, between his thighs, behind his ankles. All of them bore his face. They smiled, mouth stretching nearly to their eyes. Saul remained still, head bowed, as though stunned by the sudden appearance of all these selves. The faces stared closely at every visible surface. The skin twitched lightly. As time passed, they began to look more and more like Saul's current form. "They're mimicking me." Saul suddenly grinned. He grinned happily, mouth nearly splitting to his eyes. "Then let's see if you can mimic this." His body suddenly softened, like steel melting into molten metal. Once he lost his solid form, his body began to reshape. Horrific tentacles, lined with sucker mouths full of sharp teeth, sprouted from the shifting liquid form. The faces clinging to him panicked in an instant, losing their target. They hesitated, unsure whether to transform into Saul's current shape. But Saul gave them no chance. He wielded the tentacles to ensnare each parasitic face, letting the mouths under the suckers feast freely. The sound of chewing rubber echoed in his ears. In the next second, the entire dreamscape collapsed. Saul opened his eyes and saw Shea scrambling to sit up as fast as he could. He stared at Saul with eyes full of both surprise and joy. "You actually did it in one try. I felt it. The wraith hiding in my dreams suddenly vanished." Chapter 476, Summoned by the Dean. Saul stroked his chin. "Are you sure the wraith is gone? I was just about to strike it when you suddenly woke up." Shea froze, his face scrunching up. "Don't tell me you were holding back on purpose." He instinctively tensed up, ready to defend himself. But midway through his words, something seemed to occur to him. He shut his mouth and rather obediently pulled out the meditation diagram from his pack. Saul accepted the diagram and stowed it away in his storage device with a flip of his hand. Truth be told, there were many ways he could have taken the diagram from Shea. Before leaving the Wizard Tower, he had purposely brought along some lightning element spell materials. The materials from the Wizard Tower were all of high value, more than enough to trade for a meditation method Shea didn't use. But Saul had wanted to see what exactly the wraith lingering on Shea really was. "All right, I've given you the thing. Now get lost," Shea began ushering him out. Saul didn't take offense at this guy's habit of discarding people the moment he was done with them. Even if Saul had cured his nightmares, he hadn't cured his paranoia. Saul also wanted to return quickly, but just as he turned to leave, he caught something in the corner of his eye. Shea suddenly turned pitch black. Yet when Saul spun around, fully alert, Shea had returned to normal. And judging by the look on his face, Shea seemed unaware anything had just happened. "What is it? Don't tell me you're asking for more payment." Shea took a half step back upon seeing Saul's serious expression. Saul narrowed his eyes. Above Shea's head, he saw a thin line curling upward. The end of the line vanished into the air, disappearing without a trace. Troubled, Saul left. Shea was now the third person he'd seen take on a different form in his vision. A wizard apprentice whose head turned into the shape of a watcher bird, a regular store clerk who appeared as a scorched corpse, and now Shea, who had become a shadowy figure. Just what was happening to these people? Or was something happening to his own eyes? As he walked, Saul pressed lightly on his eyelid. At that moment, he saw two third-rank apprentices walking toward him. "Wizard Saul, Dean Pond requests your presence at the clock tower." Baton Academy's clock tower was a tall, slender spire located near the center of the academy grounds. Unlike the ever-present hourglass lamps inside the wizard tower, the academy used more mechanical clocks to keep time. Even Caugust City beyond the walls did the same. Saul followed the two apprentices into the clock tower and was surprised to discover it held more than met the eye. The top floor of the tower concealed an enormous interior space. He remembered that Baton Academy sold mobile houses that looked small on the outside, but contained vast internal rooms. It seemed this spellwork had also been applied here. From the outside, the top floor appeared no larger than a few square meters. In reality, it spanned over 100. The space had no partitions or wall decorations. As soon as Saul entered, he saw Dean Pond seated behind a long table. Across from him, a woman sat properly on a sofa. The woman had shoulder-length black hair and a thin, drawn appearance. Not exactly beautiful, but her eyes were strikingly bright. As Saul approached, the woman suddenly looked up. Her burning gaze exerted more pressure than even Dean Pond's presence. Yet judging by the spiritual energy radiating from her, she was only a first-rank wizard. Dean Pond smiled and greeted Saul. Seeing that he was staring at the woman, he made the introductions. "This is Bate. Like you, she's a first-rank wizard, but she's close to advancing, so she doesn't spend much time at the academy." Dean Pond's expression was filled with pride as he looked at her. "Once she completes her promotion, she'll be taking my place as the next dean." Bate rose and gave Saul a slight nod. She seemed the silent, reserved type. The standard black wizard robe hung loosely on her thin frame. Though it was summer, her collar was buttoned all the way to the top. Only her face and her pale, equally thin hands were visible. Saul also noticed that, when introducing Bate, Dean Pond had not mentioned what element she specialized in. After introductions, the three of them sat down, and Dean Pond finally brought up the real reason he had summoned Saul. "The root creature that you and Julie encountered before has appeared again. This time, the third-rank apprentice who encountered it didn't make it back alive." Dean Pond's smile vanished. "When Julie first reported the incident to me, I immediately sent people into the underground waterways to investigate. Aside from discovering that the soil had become loose, we found nothing else. The root creature was gone. This time, after the creature reappeared, a true wizard who was present managed to bring back a piece of its root." Dean Pond raised his hand, and a transparent, sealed test tube floated above his palm. Inside was a white root segment about the length of a finger. It floated quietly within the tube, rising and falling as if it were nothing more than a normal radish hair, showing no strange traits. It was indeed the same root Saul had seen before. At the time, he had taken great care not to let any part of his body be taken by the creature, so he hadn't brought back a sample. After Bates studied it, she found that the root tends to pursue creatures with magic radiation. However, it also displays a certain reaction towards soul bodies. Still, after just a few experiments, its activity level dropped rapidly. Now, it's essentially inert. Saul, did you bring back any pieces of the root creature when you encountered it last time? Saul shook his head. When the root network grows, it becomes extremely hard to deal with. Julie and I were facing it for the first time, and for safety's sake, our first instinct was to withdraw. I see. Dean Pond's expression remained unreadable. In that case, if you encounter it again and are able to bring back a sample, the Academy is willing to exchange it for magic crystals or spell materials. Saul's eyes lit up. Clearly, Baton Academy was very interested in these roots. They must have discovered something about it but hadn't shared the details with him. If that was the case, Saul decided that next time, he would keep a portion for his own study before handing over the rest. Outwardly, however, he simply nodded readily, sure. Dean Pond then asked about the battle with the root creature. After thanking Saul for his cooperation, he dismissed him. Throughout the entire conversation, the female wizard named Bate hadn't said a single word. She simply sat quietly with lowered eyes, appearing utterly uninterested in monsters or battles. As Saul left, he gave the woman another glance. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was far from ordinary. After Saul was gone, Dean Pond stood at the window, watching until Saul had walked a good distance away before turning back to Bate. What did you sense? Bate slowly raised her head, as if moving in slow motion. Even her voice was languid, like someone not fully awake. He's very alert, he didn't notice. If I wanted to keep him in Baton, there's no chance. Chapter 477, Not Human. Hearing Bate take the initiative to respond for once, Pond sighed with a complex expression. The situation in the western regions has been getting more and more complicated lately. Bate said nothing, silently stood up and walked out. Her long wizard robe dragged across the floor without making a sound. Behind her, Pond asked a little unwillingly, "Don't you have any other plans? Even Nefrit's people entered the West not long ago." Bate didn't pause for a second. She only left a soft sentence behind. "Efficiency isn't enough. Kauga still needs more people." Pond opened his mouth, but in the end didn't say a word. After receiving the evolution diagram, Saul returned home and immediately began studying it. Compared to the erosion diagram, the evolution diagram contained two additional elements, twisted light and a grotesque shadow. The grotesque shadow was easy enough to understand. It most likely represented wraiths, but the twisted light was less clear. Fortunately, Saul wasn't working alone. The four awareness entities around him could all offer advice. In the end, it was Agu, who had spent years guarding the library, who helped Saul find a book with the corresponding descriptions. Black shadow can be interpreted as a wraith. It can also be understood as aberration. Saul held the book and read aloud, word by word. Penny and little Algie flanked him on either side, while Agu and Anne sat at his right and left. Morden and Herman watched through Saul's vision via the diary. Twisted light is a kind of lure, but some wizards claim to have discovered an intelligent life form with autonomous awareness behind the light, although there's currently no way to collect this light. This book simply analyzed some uncommon forms of life, but it was rare in that it included illustrations, which closely matched those in the evolution diagram. Only the diagram itself contained more refined details, which aligned with the meditation diagram's demand for extreme precision. After several rounds of experimentation by everyone, they concluded that there was nothing wrong with the evolution diagram. Smiling, Saul took out the cylinder-shaped evolution diagram and, imitating Shea's method, spread it out into a circular shape. When the wooden panels unfolded, the pattern closest to Saul was once again that of the Black Shadow. Saul, who was about to begin his meditation, suddenly paused. Under everyone's puzzled gazes, he rolled up the diagram, absently flipped it a few times in his hands, then opened it again on the table. Still, the Black Shadow was closest to him. Saul rolled it up again and let it roll a few times across the table before opening it. Still the Black Shadow. Now the others also realized something was off. Is the pattern nearest you always fixed when opening the evolution diagram? Saul rolled it up again and handed it to Anne. When Anne opened it, the shadow was also the one closest to her. After thinking for a moment, Saul handed it to little Algie. Little Algie didn't quite understand what was going on, but still followed Saul's instructions and bit off the small ring at the top of the cylinder. The diagram unfolded, and this time, the pattern closest to little Algie was a monster. Herman sighed through the diary. I see. So, the pattern closest to the person who opens the diagram corresponds to their species. Morden ahem. The room fell silent. The only one still clueless, little Algie, quietly nudged the evolution diagram back toward Saul. Saul silently stared at the diagram in front of him. When little Algie nudged it over, the movement had spun some of the wooden panels. By the time it landed in front of Saul, the Black Shadow was once again the closest. The silence deepened. Even Penny had gone quiet. Then Saul slapped his knee and grinned to break the tension. If it says I'm a wraith, then I'm a wraith. Doesn't stop me from meditating. Seeing Saul so unfazed, the others finally relaxed. What Saul didn't tell them was that, when he got the erosion diagram, the pattern closest to him had been the octopus monster. All in all, the theme was not human. Despite the odd results, Saul felt that the evolution diagram was highly compatible with him after a few brave attempts. His meditation efficiency saw a massive boost, and when he entered a semi-immersive meditation, he began to see strange new things beyond soul fragments. Maybe because it was his first time using this new meditation method, the images were still blurry, but the world of soul fragments now appeared more vivid and three-dimensional amid crisscrossing light and shadow. If the erosion diagram had merely cracked open a sliver of the door to a new world, the evolution diagram pushed it open a bit wider. Wide enough that Saul could even stick a hand through and grab something. And this was with him still not having fully mastered the evolution diagram. Once he became more familiar with it and completed the depiction within his mental realm, maybe he could push that door open even wider. With the evolution diagram entering regular use, Saul moved on to his second line of research. Soul armament. He now had 5 wraiths in his possession. Kaugus City was indeed rich in wraiths, but unlike ancient, powerful ones, the wraiths here were usually newly formed and quite weak. The slightly stronger ones tended to get accidentally destroyed by Saul during battle. Still, the weak ones were perfect for experimentation. He treated them like dissecting corpses, attempting to break down the wraiths. He discarded the most polluted parts and picked out less tainted, but already mutated, soul body fragments. Like the centipede-like slender arms growing out from under John's head. From 5 weak wraiths, Saul only salvaged 7 usable parts. After much picking and matching, he finally cobbled together several differently shaped fragments into a scorpion-tail stinger. He used a magical formation to stabilize the artificial soul body and prevent its energy from leaking. Then he began selecting the first test subject from his 4 awareness entities. Even though he'd read a lot and conducted simulations beforehand, this was his first time performing soul body modification. Even attaching one soul body to another carried risks. It was like giving a fully limbed person an extra arm, and not just for show. This new arm needed to punch too. In other words, if things went poorly, he might end up crippling the original body. Under such conditions, the first to volunteer came as a surprise, Morden. But to Saul, it didn't matter who stepped forward. So Morden went up first. However, the first experiment didn't go well. Morden's soul body fiercely rejected the scorpion tail stinger. Before the real procedure even began, the two nearly started fighting. After 2 failed attempts, Saul switched to the second volunteer, Anne. And miraculously, the stinger that had shown intense rejection toward Morden cooperated peacefully with Anne. Once Anne had adapted to the new soul body fragment, Saul began the formal attachment procedure. 3 days later, Anne was in the room commanding her new tail to repeatedly strike at Penny flying in the air. Penny may have appeared to fly lazily, but she was actually extremely agile. Though Anne's new tail, in its soul body state, was also quite nimble, she still couldn't land a hit on Penny, who hovered just above ground level. What began as a training session slowly turned into a competition. The spacious living room was now their battlefield, with Agu and little Algie huddled in a corner watching. Agu, tusk tusk tusk, women. Little Algie, tusk 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 tusk. Chapter 478, Sudden Loss of Control. Not long after, Saul walked out from another room where he had been meditating. The moment he looked up, he saw Anne clinging to a corner of the wall like a giant spider, while Penny was teasing her by occasionally approaching and backing away. Off to the side, Agu and little Algie were watching the scene with amusement. Saul walked to the doorway and put on his outer robe. "Anne, I'm taking you outside the city to test your stability." "Yes, master." Anne leapt down from the corner. The translucent tail behind her, about 3 meters long, pressed against her back and then vanished. The room Saul had rented was within the city, not exactly close to Baton Academy, but leaving the city was still quite convenient. This time, in order to test Anne's stability, he planned to stay out in the wilderness for 7 days. It was broad daylight, yet the streets remained mostly deserted. Those who could move freely in daylight usually had some connection to wizards. Saul asked Marsh to take them to the outskirts. For the next few days, they would be living and eating in the forest. Marsh seemed delighted. Living in the city's tall buildings always made him feel uncomfortable. Once they entered the forest, the air instantly turned cool and damp. Saul asked Marsh to stop the carriage by the roadside, then took Anne with him into the woods. Having left the city, Anne also felt at ease. As she walked deeper into the forest, she kept swinging her new tail, brushing it through the foliage on either side. The leaves that were struck fell to the ground, already dried and blackened by the time they landed. This was the scorpion tail stinger that Saul had specifically crafted, focused primarily on offense, so the residual contamination on it had not been completely purged. Moreover, Saul wasn't worried about prolonged exposure affecting Anne. He could recall Anne's consciousness into the diary every few days. The diary would handle a thorough purification. The only caveat was that he had to remove the scorpion tail each time. Otherwise, the diary would treat it as a contaminated impurity and absorb it. "Master, you haven't taken any wraith cleansing missions lately," Anne said, walking backward with her hands behind her back. "I went out frequently some time ago mainly to gather more wraiths and search for a new meditation method. Now that I've achieved both, there's no need to keep going out. Once your scorpion tail stinger proves stable and problem-free, I'll consider crafting another soul weapon." In truth, Saul had another concern. he occasionally noticed certain changes in people. These changes always made him feel like this place wasn't as simple as it seemed. But since he didn't plan to stay here long, he wasn't interested in digging into any hidden secrets. The two stopped at a clearing. "I'm going to cast a few zero-rank offensive spells at you. Try your best to block them with your scorpion tail." The scorpion tail stinger, after all, was formed from soul fragments. It had no physical body. It was naturally effective against regular people, but whether it could withstand spells from a wizard remained to be seen. He needed to fully understand its strengths, weaknesses, and vulnerabilities. They had never been to the borderland, only heard it was extremely dangerous. Having more means of self-defense would be invaluable. However, just as the test began, the ground beneath them suddenly shifted. Anne was stepping back, preparing to twist apart Saul's casually cast shadow spell with her tail, when she suddenly felt something tighten around her ankle. As a consciousness body, her perception of the vessel wasn't as sharp as a normal person. Instead, it was Saul who noticed the anomaly first. A thumb-thick, pale-colored tendril suddenly burst from the soil and coiled tightly around Anne's leg, yanking her downward. The tendril constricted around her ankle, and the ground beneath her abruptly softened. Her entire lower leg sank straight into the earth. At that moment, Saul hurled a fireball directly into the ground. With a loud boom, the compacted soil violently exploded. Plant roots and rocks scattered everywhere. Dust covered Anne's figure, but the blast gave her the chance to break free from the tendril's grip. But before she could retreat more than a few steps, more tendrils, identical in form, burst from another direction. They seemed to have locked onto Anne, wrapping around her limbs and dragging her back underground. This time, Saul clearly saw what was happening. The things emerging from the earth weren't ordinary branches. They were the same root tendrils he had seen in the underground sewers. But why were they targeting Anne? Was it a distraction tactic? Saul immediately grew alert and cast soul armor. But this time he was wrong. Because the root tendrils completely ignored him, only lunging toward Anne. Anne lashed out with her scorpion tail, which she had grown quite accustomed to using. Yet she quickly realized that the tendrils were completely unaffected by the pollution carried on the tail. The stinger, in its needle-like form, did little damage. Its real threat came from the lingering wraith corruption it delivered. Yet somehow, the corruption had no effect whatsoever on the roots. Saul, seeing that the roots had no intention of attacking him, was confused but quickly began preparing a spell. These roots were powerful. Given the diary's previous warning, Saul decided not to approach them directly. Instead, he prepared a third-rank spell to destroy them. Flame Arrow. The root creature had strong resistance to dark element magic. Saul worried that his shadow bind wouldn't hold them, and might even aid them instead. Though Flame Arrow wasn't his primary element, and both its casting speed and power were lacking, it was still a potent offensive spell. Especially against wood element beings, fire was a natural counter. By the time Saul's Flame Arrow was ready, half of Anne's body had already been pulled underground. Saul recalled where the attacking roots had emerged from, and fired the spell toward another patch of open ground. The massive arrow, blazing with erupting flame, plunged underground in the blink of an eye. Unlike the earlier fireball, the arrow didn't explode on impact. Instead, it concentrated all its kinetic and thermal energy directly on the target. This was the hallmark of a third-rank spell, greater energy with less waste. A few seconds after the flame arrow struck, the earth began to tremble. The entire clearing and the trees around it shook violently. The ground split open with several cracks, and a plume of black smoke seeped up from below. Saul flew to Anne's side, her body still half buried. From behind him, little Algae emerged and propped up Anne's arms, pulling her from the ruptured earth. but Anne seemed to have suffered some unknown attack. Her eyes were tightly shut, and her body limp. Anne, Anne. Saul called her through the diary, but there was no response. Just as little Algy was about to hand the unconscious Anne over, her eyes suddenly snapped open. Her eyes were pitch black, and her mouth opened unnaturally wide. Her teeth rapidly elongated, creating a horrifying contrast against her otherwise cute and delicate face. Saul's hands immediately shifted from catching to restraining, locking her neck and shoulders to prevent her transforming mouth from getting any closer. Yet a translucent scorpion tail had already arched over Saul's back, aiming straight for his heart. Saul glimpsed the powerful aura from behind and made no move to dodge. But the scorpion tail never reached him. In fact, the moment it moved, it suddenly vanished. At the same time, Anne, who had been furiously trying to bite Saul's arm, went limp again. Saul hoisted Anne over his shoulder and cast a wary glance at the ground below. After he released the flame arrow, the underground creature had gone quiet. Even after he subdued Anne, there was no further movement. Saul couldn't gauge the true strength of the root creature. He waited in place for a while, confirmed there were no other ambushes, then carried Anne and hurried out of the forest. Originally, he had planned to spend several days out here testing Anne's tail for stability. But once he sensed something was wrong, when Anne's condition began to resemble a case of corruption-induced mutation, he didn't hesitate. He immediately recalled her into the diary. Naturally, the tail, being connected to Anne, was also retracted. In the end, Saul had no choice but to carry a lifeless body back to the road. Marsh had just lain down atop the carriage to nap when he saw Saul emerge from the woods with Anne on his shoulder, his expression dark as night. He jumped down at once. "Master, what happened?" Saul didn't explain. He simply climbed into the carriage and said, "Head back." Chapter 479, The Hidden Monster. On the way back to the temporary residence, Saul had already confirmed that the scorpion tail absorbed into the diary had been destroyed, which left him quite frustrated. Previously, Saul would detach the scorpion tail stinger before storing Anne in the diary. But today's situation was urgent. Anne suddenly lost control, which made Saul suspect that the pollution attached to the scorpion tail might have affected her sanity during battle. Adding to that, there was the root tentacle monster beneath his feet that could have launched another attack at any moment. Saul had no choice but to quickly deal with Anne's situation and take her away. Still, compared to the loss of the scorpion tail stinger, what truly concerned him was the root tentacle monster's sudden assault on Anne. Those roots appeared soft and slender, but they were incredibly tough. Ordinary weapons couldn't even cut through them. And when he saw that even Anne's scorpion stinger had no effect on the roots, his brows furrowed even deeper. That root tentacle was also immune to wraith pollution. But most importantly, those were just the roots. What exactly were they connected to? Could it be the gift Kismet intended for him, that massive tree? When they hurried back to the temporary residence, Agu immediately rushed up to meet them. "Master, why did you come back so suddenly?" Saul recounted what had happened in the forest to Agu. By that time, Anne had also recovered. "Anne, why did you suddenly lose control just now?" Saul asked. Inside the diary, Anne still seemed a little dazed. "I'm not entirely sure. It just felt like a lot of thoughts suddenly flooded into my mind. There seemed to be something disgusting inside those tree roots." "Tree roots? Are you certain they were tree roots?" When I wasn't fully conscious, I vaguely sensed that the roots were connected to a large tree." "Can you tell where that tree is located?" "No, it was far away, and I wasn't fully aware at the time." At this point, Herman, who had been silently observing from the side, spoke with a bit of lingering fear. "If just these roots are that powerful, wouldn't the tree they're connected to be at least as strong as a second-rank entity?" Agu, sitting beside Saul, shook his head. Master encountered the root tentacle monster in the city and again out in the suburbs. If that monster is mobile, it's one thing, but if it's immobile. Morden continued Agu's unspoken thoughts inside the diary. If that tree can't move, then its root system covers an unimaginably wide area. Saul understood what they meant. Judging by the strength of the roots and their spread, that tree might have enough power to rival an entire city. If it could wipe out a city in one blow, didn't that mean the tree had already reached third-rank strength? With that thought, Saul immediately felt an urge to leave. But after thinking it over, he didn't actually flee. Kaugus City wasn't newly built. It had stood for years, and there had been no rumors of any wizards being harmed by tree-based monsters. Besides, in the wizarding world, it was normal for monsters to occasionally appear. Was he supposed to only live in places guaranteed to be safe? Such places wouldn't even have enough magical materials for Saul to study. Taking a deep breath, Saul said, "We don't yet know why the tree monster attacked Anne. For now, Anne, don't go out unnecessarily, and you either, Agu. I'll head to Baton Academy to gather some information." Saying it and doing it, Saul went straight to find Shea. People like Shea, who always suspected others were out to harm him, generally didn't like going out, so Saul went directly to his home. Sure enough, Shea was home, but this time he didn't let Saul in. "Tree roots." Shea was stunned for a moment, then hesitated before saying, "I've heard there was a big tree in Kaugus City once, but it was burned down many years ago." Burned down? Saul doubted that the tree had truly been destroyed. Were there ever incidents of tree roots attacking people? Shea shrugged. "Anything can attack you in Kaugus, plants, animals, monsters. Even if roots did attack people in the past, it'd be impossible to say for sure whether it was from the same plant." Saul thought for a moment and then asked, "Why are there so many wraiths in Kaugus City? Isn't there any preventative measure besides capturing them?" When asked this question, Shea's expression shifted slightly. He licked the corner of his mouth and lowered his voice. "If you really want to know, go ask Dean Pond. Kaugust's current prosperity, he's the one who made it happen." Standing under the shadow of his eaves, Shea's expression was shadowy and unreadable. To gain something, one must always pay a price, don't you think? It was clear Shea knew something, but he clearly had no intention of telling Saul. After leaving, Saul did go to look for Dean Pond, as Shea had suggested. But he didn't directly ask about the hidden abnormalities in Kaugus City, because even if he did, the dean wouldn't tell him. Instead, Saul used the recent attack in the suburbs as a pretext to inquire whether there had been any new progress in the research on root-type monsters. He noticed that when Dean Pond heard the root monster had appeared in the suburbs, there was a flash of panic in his expression. But he quickly masked the panic with surprise and expressed skepticism, saying that the monster that appeared in the sewer system last time had likely already left the city. He then told Saul to report the incident to Kent. Kent was responsible for dealing with wraith incidents that regular cleaner couldn't handle. He would gather people, share intelligence, and organize efforts to tackle powerful wraiths that ordinary wizards struggled against. After hearing this, Saul casually asked, "Has Kent always been the one handling wraith incidents?" Dean Pond replied that it used to be another wizard, but after that wizard died unexpectedly during a battle with a wraith, Kent took over. And ever since Kent took charge, hardly any wizards had died in such battles. Dean Pond told Saul that if he ever discovered anything threatening, he should report it to Kent. He was quite enthusiastic. A wizard enthusiastic. On the surface, Saul thanked the dean, but inwardly he left Baton Academy with a swirl of complicated thoughts. By now, he was almost certain the dean knew about the root tentacle monster. Dean Pond might even be the one who cultivated it. The last time he deliberately called Saul to the clock tower and showed him the root segment in a test tube, It was very likely a reverse probe, to test how much Saul knew about the root monster, to see whether he had obtained part of the roots. And that wizard Bate, who was in the clock tower at the time, was likely connected to this hidden monster as well. There were many wizards in Caugust, and Saul wasn't the only outsider. The fact that they were so cautious toward him likely meant they were wary of Gorsa behind him. This also indirectly confirmed that the trouble Baton Academy was hiding couldn't be resolved by a single true wizard. After this incident, Saul didn't act abnormally. In fact, he started participating even more frequently in cleaner missions to collect new wraiths. Although the scorpion tail stinger had been accidentally used up without achieving anything, it had confirmed Saul's theory about soul armaments. While staying in Caugust, he had to collect as many wraith fragments as possible. Ideally, he wanted to fully arm all 4 consciousnesses. During this time, perhaps due to his repeated complaints, stirring up concern from those in the shadows, he never encountered the root tentacle monster again. At the same time, Saul made another discovery during his missions. A newly born wraith could be subdued with minimal effort. And since new wraiths constantly emerged in Caugust, Saul realized he didn't need to rely on the guard squad anymore. He could find newborn wraiths himself. Thus, he dispatched the nightmare butterfly Penny to search every night for strange spirits forming in dark corners. But to his surprise, the first one to bring back news of a newly born wraith was Penny. It was little Algie. Chapter 480, Stain. Izzy squeezed through the crowd into her apartment building. There were too many people waiting for the lift pods. Izzy glanced at the dense crowd ahead and decided to take the stairs with a portion of the others. After the crowd dispersed across various floors, by the time Izzy reached the 17th floor where she lived, no one else was around. Just as she stepped onto the 17th floor, she saw the lift pod door open, and 2 people squeezed out. She recognized them at a glance. It was the couple from next door. "Good evening," Izzy forced a smile and greeted them. The couple merely nodded slightly, their faces full of exhaustion. Izzy had known them before. They used to live in the same neighboring town. They were warm and friendly back then. But not long after entering the city, they were confined by this steel cage, and their smiles gradually vanished. Izzy returned to her rented apartment. As soon as she closed the door, the smile on her face crumbled. "Phew, I'm exhausted." She pressed a familiar spot on the wall, and the room lit up immediately. What had seemed like mysterious magical technology a year ago no longer moved her. She shrugged, looked down, kicked off her shoes, and walked toward her bedroom. This small suite was shared between her and another girl. They met through a rental agency, and each bedroom had its own lock. But after living together for a year, Izzy hardly ever locked her door anymore. The light in the center of the room cast her shadow on the wall. The shadow looked odd, much thinner than Izzy. Like a skeleton dressed in clothes, stripped of flesh. She didn't notice the strange shadow on the wall and instead dove straight onto her bed, burying her face into the pillow until she felt suffocated, then flipped over. "I really miss the farm days," she sighed. "Life in the city is exhausting and dull. There's no hope of promotion at all. How do people in books come up with such clever ideas?" Life in Caugust City was undoubtedly convenient, but her job consumed almost all of her time, leaving her with less and less for anything else. And her job was extremely monotonous, just making a component of a component for a certain magical tool. She had no idea what the final product even was, or what kind of wondrous device it became. All core information was kept strictly confidential from ordinary workers like her. "Honestly, I've made quite a bit of money already." Izzy pulled out her savings slips from under the pillow. 1, 2, 3. "I never would have dared dream of this kind of money before. Maybe I should just go home with it." She calculated the total of the slips and the amount she'd lose by withdrawing early. 10 minutes later, she lay back down on the bed, cradling the slips to her chest. Maybe just 3 more years. At that moment, she heard a door open next door. Just now, while calculating her earnings, Izzy had secretly locked her bedroom door in case her roommate returned and saw her. So when she heard the door open, she tilted her head to confirm. It was indeed the door to the other bedroom opening. Strange, her roommate usually came back later than her. When Izzy got home earlier, the living room light was off, and the bedroom door next door was shut tight. She'd assumed her roommate wasn't home today either. She stuffed the slips back under the pillow, planning to slip on her shoes and go greet her roommate. But just as she bent down to put on her shoes, she suddenly heard her bedroom door handle jiggle twice. Izzy froze and looked up at the door. She clearly saw the brass door handle slowly turning halfway. Click, click. The handle got stuck halfway and couldn't turn further. She had locked it earlier. The brass handle turned back, then slowly twisted again. Izzy should have called out cheerfully, "Coming, coming," and gone to open the door. But for some reason today, as she watched the slowly twisting handle, a sense of fear welled up inside her. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Suddenly, she had the eerie thought, what if the person at the door wasn't her roommate? But if it wasn't her roommate, then who had come out of the other room? Could it be a thief? The handle twisted again, still stuck halfway. Then the person outside gave up. Izzy heard the footsteps slowly fade away, heading toward the main entrance. Listening carefully, the footsteps sounded strange too, like the person had a shoe full of sand. Izzy grew nervous, wondering if it really could be a thief. But the high-rises built by the wizard lords required a pass to enter each floor. The door outside the apartment also needed a pass to open. Only the bedroom doors still had old-fashioned locks. Izzy, now with her shoes on, tiptoed to her bedroom door. By then, the footsteps in the living room had already faded. She cautiously unlocked her door and opened a crack to peek outside. Her room faced the apartment door at an angle, just in time to see someone walking out. It was her roommate. The girl walked out with her head down, her face looking somewhat blurry in the boundary between light and shadow. Ah, it really was her. Izzy breathed a sigh of relief, her shoulders relaxing. Geez, not saying anything at all, you scared me half to death. Izzy was just about to call out to her when she saw her roommate didn't even notice her and simply shut the door behind her. The main door closed with a heavy bang, making Izzy jump. She fully opened her bedroom door, puzzled as she looked toward the entrance. What's up with her? Was her resignation rejected? Her roommate had moved to the city a few years earlier and had recently been complaining nonstop about how exhausting and stifling the life here was. She'd already decided to return to her original village. Apparently, she'd even written her resignation letter. So she'd been in high spirits lately. But today she looked really off. Izzy grew a little concerned, wondering if she should chase after her roommate to check in. Maybe she'd come to turn the doorknob just to talk. But just as she stepped out, she noticed the floor was covered in black footprints. Good grief, what did she step in? Her shoes were filthy. Turning back, Izzy saw a dark handprint smeared on her bedroom door handle. Her hand, too. Mid-sentence, a wave of fear struck her. She quickly retreated back into her room and locked the door. She didn't even dare linger by it, throwing off her shoes and scrambling into bed, wrapping herself tightly in the blanket. At that moment, several urban ghost stories began replaying in her mind one by one, and the girl's whole body started trembling uncontrollably. Meanwhile, in the hallway, the girl who had just left the apartment walked slowly with her head down. But it took her over 10 seconds to cross just 3 or 4 meters. Then she stopped in front of a tightly shut door. She twisted the doorknob. It wouldn't open without a pass. She paused, seemingly hesitating, thinking. Then she raised her hand. Knock, knock, knock. There were a few soft raps. A voice responded from inside the room. Who is it? The girl's expression remained vacant. She said nothing, but after hearing the response, she pounded the door a few times with greater force. Coming, coming. A clear voice and hurried footsteps sounded from behind the door. A slight smile tugged at the vacant girl's lips. But at that very moment, a black tendril suddenly shot out from the stairwell and instantly snatched the girl away. Moments later, the door she had knocked on opened. A man stepped out. He looked around the empty hallway, confused, thinking he'd misheard. Who was it? His wife called from inside. No one. Maybe little Bao was banging on the wall again. Smack him. The man shook his head with a chuckle. Just as he was about to go back in, he noticed a few dark spots on the door. He reached out and touched them. Tiny black flakes started falling off.